Hello and welcome back. Tonight we're going somewhere quiet, somewhere dark, but not in a frightening way. Dark in the way a blanket fort is dark, or the way closing your eyes feels safe. We're descending into the deep ocean, that vast, patient wilderness that covers most of our planet, and yet remains more mysterious to us than the surface of Mars. Before we begin, I'd love to know where you are watching from tonight. And how was your day? Drop a comment below. I always enjoy reading your comments. If you enjoy falling asleep to these videos, please consider subscribing. It helps more people find their way here. Now let's begin. There are sounds in the ocean that we've heard only once. In the summer of 1997, an array of underwater microphones positioned across the Pacific Ocean, originally placed there during the Cold War to listen for submarines, picked up something unusual. It was an ultra-low frequency sound, rising rapidly in frequency over about 1 minute, loud enough to be detected by sensors more than 3,000 miles apart. Scientists called it the bloop, a name that feels almost comically casual for something so strange. The bloop was louder than any known animal vocalization, louder than the call of a blue whale, the largest creature ever to live on Earth. If it was biological, and the pattern of frequency modulation suggested it might be, then it came from something massive, something living in a part of the ocean we've barely explored. For years, the bloop lived in that peculiar space between science and imagination. Was it a creature? Some vast, unknown leviathan cruising through the abyssal plains? The idea wasn't as far-fetched as it might seem. After all, the colossal squid and the giant squid were considered sailors' myths until we found them. The ocean is large enough and deep enough to hide things we can't quite believe in. Eventually, scientists concluded that the bloop was most likely an ice quake. The sound of a massive iceberg cracking and calving off the Antarctic ice shelf. The acoustic signature matched. The location made sense. Mystery solved, filed away, moved on. But here's what's interesting. Even if the bloop was ice, not animal, the ocean is still full of sounds we can't identify. The hydrophone arrays pick them up regularly. Whistles, groans, rhythmic patterns that don't match anything in our databases. Some are probably geological, some are probably biological, and some we simply don't know. The ocean is not silent. It hums and clicks and murmurs with 1,000 voices, most of which we've never attached to a source. And there's something both unsettling and oddly peaceful about that. The idea that beneath us, beneath the weight of all that water, conversations are happening in languages we haven't learned yet. The bloop might have been ice, yes, but it was also a reminder that the deep ocean speaks, and we're only beginning to listen. Imagine you're on a ship in the middle of the ocean at night, far from any coast, far from any light pollution. The stars above you are brilliant, sharp, uncountable. And then you notice something impossible. The sea itself is glowing, not in patches, not in the sparkles and flashes of disturbed bioluminescence that sailors have known for centuries. No, the entire ocean around you, as far as you can see to the horizon, is glowing with a steady, ethereal blue-white light. The water looks almost milky, luminous, as if the stars have somehow fallen into the sea and dissolved there. This is the phenomenon known as milky seas, and it's one of the most hauntingly beautiful mysteries the ocean holds. Milky seas have been reported by sailors for hundreds of years. described in ship logs and maritime folklore. But for a long time, scientists weren't sure if they were real or just tricks of exhausted minds in the isolation of long voyages. Then in 2005, satellites detected one. Off the coast of Somalia, a milky sea glowed steadily for 3 consecutive nights, covering an area of roughly 6,000 square miles, an area larger than Connecticut. We now know they're real. We know they're caused by bioluminescent bacteria, probably a species called Vibrio harveyi, blooming in enormous numbers and glowing in unison. But what we don't know is why. Bioluminescence usually serves a purpose. It's a warning or a lure, or a way to confuse predators. But milky seas glow steadily for hours, sometimes days. They're not flashing to startle something, not pulsing to communicate. They're just glowing. All those billions of bacteria scattered across miles of ocean, emitting their cold light together. Some scientists think the bacteria might be using a form of chemical communication called quorum sensing. They glow when their population reaches a critical density, perhaps as a way of coordinating behavior or attracting nutrients. But that's still speculation. We've only witnessed milky seas a handful of times. We've never been able to study one up close, to take samples while it's happening, to measure what's going on in the water. And so they remain mysterious. These vast glowing patches of ocean, appearing without warning and fading just as suddenly, visible from space but almost never encountered by ships anymore, now that we have GPS and defined shipping lanes that keep us away from the open, empty sea. Perhaps that's part of what makes them so enchanting. They're phenomena that belong to an older way of knowing the ocean, when crossing it meant surrendering to its vastness, when you might encounter something wondrous and have no way to explain it except to write it down in a log that someone, someday, might believe. The ocean still holds moments like that, moments of pure, inexplicable beauty. Moments that remind us that not everything needs to be understood to be real. In 1968, the research submarine Alvin was exploring the deep ocean off the coast of Massachusetts when something unusual happened. A piece of equipment on the submarine's exterior, a section of framework, somehow trapped a shark. The crew didn't realize it until they surfaced. When they brought the shark up and examined it, they found something strange. Despite having been dead for hours, pulled from the near-freezing water of the deep sea to the relative warmth of the surface, the meat was still fresh, not just edible, genuinely fresh, as if the shark had died moments before. This was deeply unexpected. On land or in warm surface waters, decomposition begins almost immediately. Bacteria get to work. Enzymes break down tissue. Things decay. It's one of the fundamental processes of nature. Death leads to decomposition, which returns nutrients to the ecosystem, which feeds new life. The circle continues, but in the deep ocean, apparently, that circle turns much more slowly. The temperature down there hovers just above freezing, between 2 and 4 degrees Celsius. The pressure is immense, thousands of pounds per square inch, enough to crush most surface-dwelling creatures instantly. And there's no light, no photosynthesis, which means the entire ecosystem runs on a different set of rules. What scientists began to realize through that accidental shark and countless studies since is that biological processes in the deep sea operate on timescales that seem impossible to us. A dead whale that sinks to the ocean floor, what researchers call a whale fall, can sustain a complex ecosystem for decades. Specialized bacteria, worms, crustaceans, and fish arrive in waves, each species adapted to feed on a different stage of decomposition. The bones alone might provide nutrients for 50 years or more. We still don't fully understand how decay works under such extreme pressure and cold. The bacteria that drive decomposition at the surface can't survive down there. Different species have evolved to fill that role, but they work slowly, patiently, as if time itself moves differently in the deep. There's something almost poetic about that. The idea that the deep ocean is not just a different place, but a different kind of time, where things persist, where the evidence of what once lived lingers far longer than it does in the bright, warm, hurried world above. That shark, pulled up by accident, was a small glimpse into a realm where the ordinary rules don't apply, where death doesn't hurry, where the ocean holds on to things, quietly in the cold and dark, until it's ready to let them go. There is a place on Earth deeper than Mount Everest is tall. If you could somehow lift Everest from its base in the Himalayas and drop it into the Challenger Deep, the deepest point in the Mariana Trench, the peak would still be more than a mile underwater. The summit, where climbers gasp for oxygen in the thin air, would rest beneath 7,000 feet of ocean, silent and dark, covered by the weight of all that water. The Challenger Deep reaches down nearly 36,000 feet, almost 7 miles beneath the surface. To put that in perspective, if you started at sea level and traveled straight down at the speed of a leisurely walk, it would take you more than 3 hours to reach the bottom. 3 hours of walking through increasing darkness, increasing cold, increasing pressure, descending through a world that becomes progressively more alien with every step. Only 4 people have ever been there. 4 in all of human history. James Cameron, the filmmaker, made the journey in 2012. Victor Vescovo went in 2019. And before them in 1960, Jacques Picard and Don Walsh descended in a bathyscaphe called the Trieste. A journey so dangerous and unprecedented that they weren't sure they'd survive it. What's remarkable is that every single expedition to the Challenger Deep has found life. Not just microbial life, not just bacteria clinging to existence in the harshest environment on the planet, but actual animals. Amphipods, translucent and shrimp-like, scuttling across the sediment. Strange, pale fish with bodies built to withstand pressure that would instantly crush a human being. Sea cucumbers slowly crawling across the ooze, processing the marine snow that drifts down from the world above. Each visit has revealed organisms that had never been seen before. New species, unrecorded, living in what we assumed would be an empty, lifeless void. And if every single trip finds new life, the implication is staggering. We have no idea what else is down there. The deep ocean trenches aren't just deep, they're also isolated from one another, separated by thousands of miles of shallower seafloor. Each trench is, in a sense, its own world, an island ecosystem where evolution has taken its own peculiar path. The creatures in the Mariana Trench might be entirely different from those in the Tonga Trench, or the Philippine Trench, or any of the other dozen deep gashes in the ocean floor. And we've barely looked. The Challenger Deep has been visited 4 times. 4 times in 65 years. There are convenience stores that get more foot traffic in an afternoon. The deep trenches represent perhaps the last true wilderness on Earth, not in the romantic sense of untouched forests or pristine mountains, but in the literal sense of places we have not been, places we have not seen, places that remain genuinely unknown. Not unknown in the way that we might not have cataloged every species of beetle in the Amazon, but unknown in the way that we don't even know what's there, what swims in the darkness, what crawls across the abyssal plains, what strange adaptations have evolved in the crushing pressure and eternal night. There is something humbling about that. We've sent rovers to Mars, probes to the outer solar system, telescopes that can see galaxies billions of light years away. And yet the deepest parts of our own ocean, right here, on the planet we live on, remain more mysterious, more inaccessible, more unknown than the surface of distant worlds. Perhaps that's as it should be. Perhaps the Earth is entitled to keep some secrets. Perhaps there's value in knowing that there are still places beyond our reach, still frontiers that require courage and ingenuity to explore, still depths that hold wonders we haven't imagined yet. The Challenger deep is waiting, patient, silent. 7 miles down, where the weight of the ocean presses down with the force of 50 jumbo jets, life continues in ways we're only beginning to understand. Deep beneath the surface of the ocean, there are lakes. Not metaphorical lakes, not formations that merely resemble lakes. Actual lakes, with shores and surfaces sitting on the seafloor. You could, if you had the right equipment and could survive the pressure, stand at the edge of one and look out across its surface, watching it ripple with underwater currents, seeing the boundary between the lake water and the ocean water above it as clearly as you might see the surface of a pond from beneath. They're called brine pools, and they form when salt deposits buried beneath the seafloor dissolve and seep upward, creating water that is so much saltier, so much denser than regular seawater, that it cannot mix. It sinks, it pools, it creates a distinct layer, separate and strange, sitting in depressions in the ocean floor like something from another world. The largest brine pools are startlingly big. Some are miles across. One in the Gulf of Mexico, called the Orca Basin, is roughly 7 miles long and a mile wide, filled with water that is 8 times saltier than normal seawater. From above, in a submarine or on a remote camera, it looks almost magical. A dark, mirror-smooth surface in the middle of the seafloor, reflecting the lights of your vessel, rippling gently as if there were wind, though of course there is no wind down there. But these lakes are deadly. The water in them is not just extremely salty. It's also often rich in methane, hydrogen sulfide, and other chemicals that are toxic to most marine life. If a fish swims into a brine pool, it dies almost instantly, poisoned and pickled by the chemical stew. The edges of these pools are sometimes littered with the bodies of creatures that wandered too close: crabs, fish, eels, their forms preserved in the salty water like specimens in a jar. And yet, as always in the deep ocean, life finds a way. At the edges of brine pools, where the toxic water meets the regular ocean, specialized organisms thrive. Tube worms anchor themselves in the sediment, their red plumes waving gently in the current. Mussels cluster at the boundaries. Bacteria form thick mats, metabolizing the methane and hydrogen sulfide, turning poison into energy through chemosynthesis, the same process that sustains life around hydrothermal vents. These edge communities are strange and specific, adapted to conditions that would kill almost anything else. They live at the boundary between two worlds, feeding on the chemicals that bubble up from Earth's interior, thriving in a place that, seems designed to be hostile to life. Scientists study brine pools not just because they're fascinating in themselves, but because they might offer clues to how life began on Earth, or how it might exist elsewhere in the solar system. The chemistry of these pools, the methane, the hydrogen sulfide, the absence of oxygen, resembles the chemistry of early Earth, before photosynthesis filled the atmosphere with oxygen and transformed the planet. Life on Earth began in environments that would be toxic to us now, feeding on chemicals rather than sunlight, and brine pools might be windows into that ancient world. There's also the tantalizing possibility that similar environments might exist elsewhere. Europa, one of Jupiter's moons, is covered in a thick layer of ice, but beneath that ice is an ocean, a global ocean of liquid water, kept warm by tidal forces from Jupiter's gravity. We don't know what that ocean is like, but we suspect it might have hydrothermal vents, chemical gradients, perhaps even brine pools of its own. If life exists on Europa, it might live in conditions very similar to the strange communities thriving at the edges of Earth's underwater lakes. So these lakes within the ocean are more than just curiosities. They're laboratories, natural experiments in extreme biology, reminders that life is more resilient, more creative, more adaptable than we often give it credit for. And they're beautiful in their own eerie way. Those dark, still surfaces sitting quietly on the seafloor, reflecting light that has traveled through miles of water to reach them. Lakes beneath the sea, borders between one kind of water and another. Places where the rules are different, where chemistry does things we're still learning to understand. The ocean keeps finding ways to surprise us, even when we think we've seen everything it has to offer. It reveals another layer of strangeness, another example of how reality can be stranger and more wonderful than we imagined. In the deepest parts of the ocean, where sunlight cannot reach, where the darkness is total and absolute, there is still light. It comes from the creatures themselves. Bioluminescence, the production of light through chemical reactions inside living tissue, is so common in the deep sea that scientists estimate up to 90% of the organisms living there can produce their own light. It's not the exception, it's the rule. In the midnight zone and below, glowing is simply what you do. And here's what's extraordinary. Collectively, these organisms produce more light in the deep ocean than the sun provides to those depths, which is to say, they produce more than zero, and the sun provides exactly zero. But it's more than that. The sheer amount of bioluminescent activity happening at any given moment in the deep ocean, the flashes, the glows, the steady lights of anglerfish lures, and the sparkling clouds of startled dinoflagellates, represents an enormous output of biological energy, all devoted to making light where there should be none. But here's the mystery. We don't fully understand why. Bioluminescence obviously serves functions. We know some of them. Anglerfish dangle glowing lures to attract prey. Certain squid flash bright lights to startle predators or create confusion. Some fish have light organs under their bodies that match the faint glow of the surface far above, camouflaging their silhouettes from predators looking up. These are strategies, tactics, solutions to the problem of survival in the dark. But many bioluminescent displays don't fit any obvious explanation. Some jellyfish pulse with light for no apparent reason. Some organisms glow constantly, advertising their presence when stealth might seem more advantageous. The patterns are sometimes elaborate, beautiful, seemingly more complex than mere survival requires. And then there's the question of communication. When a creature flashes in the darkness, what is it saying? Who is it talking to? The deep ocean is vast and sparsely populated. Encounters between individuals might be rare. So why have so many species developed elaborate light displays? Some scientists think bioluminescence might serve functions we haven't considered yet. Perhaps it's not just about seeing or being seen, but about chemical signaling, about marking territory in a three-dimensional space where scent and sound disperse unpredictably. Perhaps the patterns of light carry information we can't decode: species recognition signals, mating displays, warnings about food sources or danger. Or perhaps, and this is speculation, the kind of gentle wondering that feels appropriate for late-night contemplation, perhaps some of it serves no function at all. Perhaps it's a byproduct of chemistry, a side effect of metabolic processes that happen to produce light. Evolution is often elegantly efficient, but it's also sometimes accidentally beautiful. Not everything that exists has to justify itself with utility. The deep ocean is full of lights we don't understand, patterns we can't interpret, displays that seem to be saying something in a language we haven't learned. And there's something almost poetic about that. The idea that there are conversations happening in the darkness, messages being sent and received, meanings being made, all beyond our comprehension. We swim through the ocean with our bright submarine lights, our cameras and sensors, thinking we're illuminating the darkness. But the ocean has its own light, its own language of luminescence, its own reasons for glowing. We're just beginning to learn how to read it, and maybe we never fully will. Maybe the deep ocean's light shows are meant for deep ocean eyes, for creatures whose vision operates on different principles than ours, for whom patterns and colors mean things we can't access. Maybe some mysteries aren't meant to be solved, just witnessed, appreciated, wondered at. The deep sea glows. It outshines the sun in its own domain, and every flash, every pulse, every steady gleam is a small act of defiance against the darkness. A tiny assertion that even in the deepest, coldest, most inhospitable places, life persists, and it makes beauty, and it shines. Water, as we know, flows downhill. It's one of those fundamental facts of existence, as reliable as gravity itself, which of course is what causes it. Rain falls from clouds, rivers run to the sea, waterfalls cascade over cliffs in great torrents of white foam and mist. But here's something that seems impossible at first. Beneath the ocean, where everything is already underwater, there are waterfalls, massive waterfalls. Waterfalls that dwarf anything we have on land. The largest of these is in the Denmark Strait, between Greenland and Iceland. Cold, dense water from the Nordic seas meets warmer water from the Ermanger Sea. And because the cold water is heavier, denser, it sinks. It pours over an underwater ridge and plunges downward in a cascade that drops 1,100 feet, more than 3 times the height of Angel Falls in Venezuela, which is the tallest waterfall on land. And this isn't a trickle. The Denmark Strait Cataract carries more than 175 million cubic feet of water per second. To put that in perspective, that's more water than all the rivers on Earth's surface combined. The Amazon, the Nile, the Mississippi, the Yangtze add up every river flowing across every continent. And the Denmark Strait underwater waterfall carries more. These underwater cascades are invisible from the surface, of course. You could sail a ship directly over one and never know it was there. The ocean above looks calm, ordinary, giving no hint of the tremendous forces at work below. But these waterfalls drive the ocean's thermohaline circulation, the great conveyor belt of currents that moves heat and nutrients around the planet, regulating climate, sustaining ecosystems, connecting the Arctic to the Antarctic in a slow planetary scale cycle that takes 1,000 years to complete. We've only recently begun to map these underwater features in detail. For most of human history, the ocean floor was more mysterious than the surface of the moon. We knew it was down there. We knew it had mountains and valleys, but the specifics were hidden beneath miles of opaque water. It wasn't until the development of sonar, satellites, and deep-sea exploration technology in the latter half of the 20th century that we started to see the true topography of the seafloor. And what we found was a landscape as dramatic as anything on land. Mountain ranges longer than the Andes, canyons deeper than the Grand Canyon. And these waterfalls, these massive, invisible rivers of cold water pouring down underwater cliffs, driving currents that shape the climate of the entire planet. There's something humbling about learning that such enormous features exist and we simply didn't know about them. It's a reminder of how recently we've begun to truly see our own planet, to understand the systems that make it work. For thousands of years of human history, we looked at the ocean and saw only the surface, the waves, the storms, the shimmering boundary between water and air. We had no idea what was happening beneath, and even now, with all our technology, we've mapped only about 20% of the ocean floor in high resolution. The rest remains sketchy, known only in broad outlines from satellite measurements of the sea surface, which can detect the gravitational effects of underwater mountains and trenches but can't see the details, can't see the waterfalls, can't see the smaller features, the local variations, the specific places where cold water spills over ridges and warm water rises from below. These underwater waterfalls are part of a system we're still learning to read. A system of currents and temperatures and densities that connects every part of the ocean in ways that aren't immediately obvious. Water that sinks in the North Atlantic might not resurface until it reaches the Pacific, decades or centuries later. Water that cools near Antarctica might travel north along the ocean floor, carrying nutrients that eventually rise in upwelling zones off the coast of Peru, feeding one of the richest fisheries in the world. The ocean is not just a body of water. It's a vast, three-dimensional circulatory system, constantly moving, constantly mixing, driven by differences in temperature and salinity and the rotation of the Earth itself. And we're only now beginning to understand how it all fits together, how the invisible waterfalls connect to the surface currents, how the deep circulation affects the climate we experience on land. There's something beautiful about that complexity, the idea that beneath the apparently simple surface of the ocean, there are layers upon layers of movement and meaning. Cascades and currents and cycles that have been running for millions of years. Indifferent to whether we notice them or not, the waterfalls are still there, still falling, still pouring cold water down into the abyssal plains. They were there before we knew to look for them. They'll be there long after we're gone. And they're carrying more water than all the rivers we can see, all the waterfalls we've named, and photographed and marveled at, flowing in darkness, in silence, in the hidden architecture of the ocean. On March 1st, 1999, hydrophones in the Pacific Ocean detected a sound unlike anything in their databases. It lasted for about 15 seconds. It was a low-frequency sound that rose rapidly in pitch, creating a pattern that scientists would later describe as almost resembling a voice, something calling out across vast distances, though not quite like any animal they knew. They named it Julia, and then they waited to hear it again. They're still waiting. Julia was loud enough to be picked up by sensors thousands of miles apart, which means it originated from something large or energetic. The acoustic signature didn't match any known geological process, not an earthquake, not an underwater volcano, not the grinding of tectonic plates. It also didn't quite match any known biological source, though the pattern of frequency modulation suggested something organic, something purposeful. For a while, Julia lived in the same speculative space as the bloop. Was it a creature? Some unknown animal making a sound we'd never heard before? The ocean has surprised us before. The songs of humpback whales weren't properly recorded until the 1960s. The clicking communication of sperm whales, which hunt in total darkness at depths of 3,000 feet or more, is still not fully understood. We're constantly discovering that the ocean is more talkative than we realized. But Julia came only once. One call on one day in 1999, and then silence. No follow-up. No similar sounds detected before or since. The hydrophone arrays are still operating, still listening, cataloging the sounds of ice calving and whale songs and submarine earthquakes. But Julia has never repeated. There are a few possibilities, each more mysterious than the last. Perhaps it was a geological event we haven't categorized yet, some rare form of underwater acoustic phenomenon that only happens under specific, unusual conditions. Perhaps it was an iceberg, though the signature doesn't quite match the known patterns of ice sounds. Perhaps it was biological, the call of an animal that is either extremely rare or that made that particular sound only once for reasons we can't fathom. Or perhaps, and this is the possibility that feels most unsettling in the quiet of night, perhaps it was something we heard only because we happened to be listening at exactly the right moment, and the rest of the time, the ocean is full of sounds like this that we simply miss. The hydrophone networks are extensive, but they don't cover the entire ocean. They can't hear everything. There are gaps in coverage, dead zones where no sensors reach. What if Julia isn't unique? What if it's just one example of thousands of sounds that occur in the deep ocean, most of which go unheard because there's no one listening? The idea is both humbling and slightly eerie, that we're eavesdropping on a world that is constantly speaking, constantly making noise, and we only catch fragments, snippets, isolated moments that we preserve and name and wonder about. Julia joined a library of unexplained ocean sounds. There's upsweep, a long-duration sound that has been detected regularly since 1991, slowly decreasing in intensity, probably related to volcanic activity, but never definitively explained. There's whistle, a brief high-frequency sound detected in 1997 that has never been heard again. There's slow down, which sounds eerily like something mechanical winding down, though it's almost certainly geological. Each of these sounds has been analyzed, studied, compared against databases of known sources. Some have been tentatively explained, others remain mysteries, and The ocean keeps producing new ones, new patterns that don't fit our categories, new acoustic events that remind us how much we still don't know. There's something almost melancholic about Julia, the idea of a sound that called out across the Pacific, loud enough to be heard by our sensors, and then was never heard again. Was it unique? Was it looking for something, calling for something that never answered? Or was it just a random acoustic event, meaningful only because we happened to hear it and give it a name? We don't know. We may never know. The ocean keeps its secrets even when we're listening. Even when we've built arrays of sensors and spent decades cataloging every sound we can detect, there are still mysteries, still moments when something speaks and we don't understand the language. Julia is out there somewhere in the archives, a 15-second recording of something unknown, a voice without a body, a call without an answer, a reminder that the ocean is larger and stranger than our ability to comprehend it, and that sometimes the most profound mysteries are the ones we hear only once and never again. In 1977, scientists exploring the Galapagos Rift made a discovery that changed biology. They found hot springs on the ocean floor, but not gentle, warm seeps. These were violent, superheated geysers erupting from cracks in the Earth's crust, spewing water at temperatures of up to 750 degrees Fahrenheit. Water that, by all rights, should have been boiling explosively into steam. But it wasn't boiling. It couldn't boil, because at those depths, under the crushing pressure of 8,000 feet of seawater, the boiling point of water is raised dramatically. The superheated water shot out of the vents in black, turbulent plumes. Black because it was loaded with dissolved minerals, metals pulled from the Earth's interior, turning the water opaque and staining everything around it dark. They called them black smokers, and they were spectacular. Chimneys of precipitated minerals built up around the vents, some of them dozens of feet tall, and from their tops poured this dark, roiling water, hot enough to melt lead, erupting into an ocean that was just above freezing. But what stunned the scientists wasn't the vents themselves. It was what was living around them. The seafloor around the black smokers was crowded with life. Not just bacteria, though there were bacteria in abundance, but animals, large animals, giant tube worms, their red plumes waving in the current, some of them 6 feet long, clams the size of dinner plates, white crabs, eyeless shrimp, fish, all clustering around the vents, thriving in conditions that should have been utterly hostile to life. This shouldn't have been possible. The deep ocean floor was supposed to be a desert, sparsely populated, sustained only by the slow rain of organic material drifting down from the sunlit waters above. And yet here was an entire ecosystem, dense and thriving, in the complete absence of sunlight. The key was chemosynthesis. The bacteria living at the vents weren't using photosynthesis. They couldn't. There was no light. Instead, they were using the chemicals in the vent water, hydrogen sulfide mostly, as an energy source. They were metabolizing poison, essentially, and turning it into organic matter. And everything else in the ecosystem was built on top of that foundation. The tube worms had no mouths, no digestive systems. They housed colonies of chemosynthetic bacteria in their tissues and lived off the nutrients the bacteria produced. The clams did the same. The entire food web was based on chemistry, not sunlight. This was revolutionary. For all of human history, we'd assumed that life on Earth ultimately depended on the sun. Plants captured sunlight, herbivores ate plants, carnivores ate herbivores, and everything at the bottom of it all traced back to photosynthesis, to the sun's energy being captured and converted into living tissue. Even deep-sea creatures, we thought, ultimately depended on the organic matter that drifted down from the sunlit surface, which itself came from photosynthesis. But here was an ecosystem that didn't need the sun at all. It ran on geothermal energy, on heat from the Earth's interior, on chemistry that would be happening even if the sun went dark. It was a completely separate branch of life's possibility, a different answer to the question of how to extract energy from the universe. And it raised immediate questions about where else life might exist. If life can thrive around hydrothermal vents in total darkness, using geothermal chemistry instead of sunlight, then maybe life doesn't require the specific conditions we have on Earth's surface. Maybe it can exist anywhere. There's liquid water, a source of chemical energy, and time for evolution to work. Europa, one of Jupiter's moons, almost certainly has a global ocean beneath its icy crust. That ocean is heated by tidal forces, the same gravitational kneading that creates hydrothermal vents on Earth. If there are vents on Europa's ocean floor, spewing hot, mineral-rich water into the cold darkness, might there be life there too? Life that has never known a sun, that exists in eternal night, but thrives anyway, feeding on chemistry, adapted to conditions we're only beginning to understand. We don't know yet. But the black smokers tell us it's possible. They tell us that life is more adaptable, more resourceful, more creative than we imagined. They tell us that the universe might be full of life that doesn't look like our life, that doesn't need our conditions, that has found completely different solutions to the problem of existence. And they're still there, still erupting, still supporting their strange communities. The black smokers on the mid-ocean ridges, scattered across the planet, hidden beneath miles of water, producing heat and chemicals, and supporting ecosystems that have been there for millions of years, waiting for us to find them, waiting for us to understand what they mean. Life doesn't need the sun. It only needs possibility and time and a little bit of chemistry. The black smokers proved that, and they opened up the universe in ways we're still processing, still exploring, still trying to comprehend. For centuries, sailors told stories of kraken, massive tentacled monsters that could pull ships beneath the waves, creatures of nightmare and legend, dismissed by scientists as superstition, exaggeration, the kind of tales that grow in the telling during long voyages at sea. And then, occasionally, something would wash ashore. A tentacle, impossibly long, a beak, massive and sharp, like something from a prehistoric age, strange sucker marks on the bodies of sperm whales, scars arranged in patterns that suggested something with arms, something large enough to fight a whale and leave evidence of the battle. The giant squid was real. That much became undeniable. Museums collected specimens, bodies that had washed up on beaches or been found floating in the ocean, dead or dying. Scientists measured them, preserved them, cataloged them. The largest confirmed specimens were enormous, 40 feet long or more, with eyes the size of dinner plates, the largest eyes in the animal kingdom. But no one had ever seen one alive in its natural habitat. Not once, not in all of human history. Every giant squid ever studied had been dead or dying, either washed ashore or caught accidentally in fishing nets. We had bodies, but we didn't have behavior. We didn't know how they lived, how they moved, what they did in the darkness of the deep ocean where they spent their lives. That changed in 2004. Japanese researchers, after years of effort, managed to capture the first photographs of a living giant squid in the wild. The images showed a creature that was simultaneously alien and graceful, its long arms trailing behind it as it moved through the water, captured by cameras triggered when the squid attacked bait, suspended at a depth of 3,000 feet. 2 years later, they filmed one. And in 2012, a team finally captured video of a giant squid in its natural habitat. Footage of the creature swimming, its arms undulating, its massive eyes reflecting the lights of the submersible. It was ghostly, silvery, moving through the darkness with an eerie elegance. But even now, nearly 2 decades after that first photograph, we still have almost no footage of them. A handful of encounters, a few minutes of video, scattered observations. For an animal that can grow to 40 feet or more, that lives in oceans covering most of the planet, we know almost nothing about their lives. We don't know how they hunt, really. We assume they're predators, catching fish and other squid with their tentacles, but we've never witnessed it. We don't know how they mate, how they raise their young, if they raise their young at all, or if they simply release eggs into the water and let them develop on their own. We don't know how long they live, how they communicate, whether they're solitary or if they ever gather in groups. And we certainly don't know how many there are. Giant squid might be rare, scattered thinly across the ocean, or they might be relatively common, just good at avoiding us. We find their beaks in the stomachs of sperm whales, which suggests whales eat them regularly, which suggests there are enough giant squid to be a meaningful food source. But we never see them. They live at depths we can't easily access, in darkness we can't penetrate without bright lights that probably scare them away. There's something haunting about that. The idea that there are creatures sharing our planet, large creatures, intelligent creatures with the biggest eyes of any animal, and they're almost completely unknown to us. We've been to the moon. We've sent probes beyond the solar system, and yet we can't figure out how to reliably find and study an animal that lives right here in our own ocean. The giant squid exists at the edge of our awareness, present but elusive, real but mysterious. We know they're there. We know approximately where they live, approximately what they eat, approximately how large they grow. But the details, the textures of their lives, the specifics of their behavior remain hidden. And if the giant squid is this mysterious, what else is down there? The colossal squid, which is even larger and lives even deeper, has been seen alive even fewer times. There are likely other species of large, deep-sea squid we haven't discovered yet. Every few years, someone finds a squid beak in the stomach of a whale that doesn't match any known species, suggesting there are types we've never even seen dead. The ocean is large enough to hide things we can barely believe in, large enough to keep secrets, even from a species that has covered the planet with sensors and satellites and ships. The giant squid proved that legends can be real, that the impossible can turn out to be merely unlikely. And it proved that even in the 21st century, even with all our technology, there are still creatures that can remain hidden in plain sight, living their mysterious lives in the depths, appearing only occasionally, briefly, like glimpses of something from another world. They're down there right now, swimming in the darkness, hunting, living, doing whatever giant squid do in ways we can only imagine. And maybe that's how it should be. Maybe not everything needs to be fully known, fully documented, fully understood. Maybe some mysteries are meant to remain mysteries. Some creatures are meant to remain elusive, and the ocean is meant to keep at least a few of its secrets, no matter how hard we try to uncover them. In 1995, divers off the coast of Japan discovered something impossible on the seafloor. Carved into the sand at a depth of about 80 feet were elaborate circular patterns, geometric designs of ridges and valleys radiating from a central point. Each circle about 6 feet in diameter, each one perfectly symmetrical, as if drawn with a compass. They looked almost like mandalas, or like the crop circles that sometimes appear mysteriously in fields of wheat, and the divers had no idea what could have created them. The patterns were too precise to be random, too intentional. But what could make something like that underwater? Not humans. The circles were in locations that weren't frequented by divers. And besides, the effort required to sculpt such detailed patterns in sand underwater would be enormous and pointless. Not geological processes. Erosion and currents don't create symmetrical designs. So the mystery lingered. For years, divers would occasionally find new circles, always in the same general area off the southern coast of Japan, always with the same intricate geometry, and no one could explain them. Then in 2011, a photographer named Yoji Ukata was diving in the area and happened to see one of the circles being made. The architect was tiny, almost comical in its improbability. A pufferfish, a male white-spotted pufferfish to be specific, about 5 inches long, working with focused intensity to create a structure 12 times its own length. The fish was building a nest. Using only its fins, it would swim in spirals, sculpting the sand, creating the ridges that formed the pattern. It would work for days, sometimes over a week, refining the design, adding decorative elements, shells, fragments of coral, arranged carefully in the valleys. The purpose of all this effort was courtship. The circles were meant to attract females, and it worked. Female pufferfish, it turned out, preferred to lay their eggs in the centers of the most elaborate circles, the ones with the most symmetrical patterns and the finest details. So the males competed through architecture, through artistry, each one trying to create the most impressive structure they could, hoping a female would choose their work over their rivals. Once the eggs were laid, the male would guard them, maintaining the nest, keeping the sand properly arranged. The ridges served a function. They helped create calmer water flow in the center, protecting the eggs from being swept away by currents. So the patterns weren't just decorative. They were functional, but they were also beautiful, far more elaborate than mere function required. This was astonishing for multiple reasons. First, it meant that a tiny fish, with a brain the size of a grain of rice, was capable of creating complex, symmetrical, geometric patterns. The pufferfish wasn't working from a blueprint. It was somehow able to sense when the pattern was right, when the symmetry was correct, when the details were sufficient. That implies a level of cognitive ability that we don't usually associate with fish. Second, it suggested that aesthetics, the appreciation of beauty, the preference for symmetrical patterns, might be far more widespread in the animal kingdom than we realized. The female pufferfish were choosing mates based on the quality of their artwork. They were, in a sense, art critics, evaluating the male's creations and deciding which ones met their standards. And third, it meant that these elaborate structures had been appearing on the seafloor for who knows how long, and we simply didn't notice. We didn't know to look. We assumed that human beings were unique in our ability to create art, to make things that were beautiful as well as functional. And here was a tiny pufferfish, working alone in the sand, proving us wrong. The discovery raised immediate questions. What else are we missing? What other behaviors, what other examples of unexpected complexity are happening in the ocean without our knowledge? The pufferfish circles were only found because a diver happened to be in the right place at the right time, and because someone had the patience to watch and wait and document what was happening. How many other mysteries are out there, waiting to be noticed? How many other species are doing remarkable things that we haven't seen because we haven't looked carefully enough, or because we're looking in the wrong places, or because we simply haven't imagined that such things might be possible? The ocean is vast, and we are small, and our attention is limited. We can't watch everything. We can't be everywhere. And so the ocean keeps surprising us, keeps revealing layers of complexity we didn't expect, keeps reminding us that our assumptions about what animals can and cannot do are often wrong. The pufferfish are still out there, still making their circles, still competing through geometry and patience. They were doing it before we knew to look. They'll be doing it after we've stopped watching. And their work is beautiful, whether we see it or not, whether we understand it or not, whether we even know it exists. That's a comforting thought in a way. The world is full of hidden artistry, secret patterns, creatures making beauty in the darkness. We don't need to witness it all. It's enough to know that it's happening, that the ocean is more creative, more surprising, more full of wonder than we can possibly comprehend. Pressure in the deep ocean is not just uncomfortable, it's crushing, fundamental. It changes the rules of chemistry and physics in ways that make survival seem impossible. At the surface, we live under one atmosphere of pressure, 14.7 pounds per square inch, the weight of the entire column of air above us pressing down. It's so constant, so familiar, that we don't notice it. But in the ocean, pressure increases by 1 atmosphere for every 33 feet of depth. At 330 feet, you're under 10 atmospheres. At 3,300 feet, you're under 100 atmospheres. And at the bottom of the Challenger Deep, nearly 36,000 feet down, you're under more than 1,000 atmospheres, about 16,000 pounds per square inch, the equivalent of having 50 jumbo jets stacked on top of you. That kind of pressure does strange things. It compresses gases into liquids. It changes the structure of proteins. It makes water denser, stranger, behaving in ways that water at the surface doesn't. It should, by all reasonable expectations, make life impossible. The cellular machinery that keeps organisms alive, the proteins that catalyze reactions, the membranes that hold cells together, shouldn't work under such extreme conditions. And yet, life is down there. Fish, amphipods, worms, jellyfish, not just surviving, but thriving, perfectly adapted to pressures that would instantly kill any surface-dwelling creature. How do they do it? We're still figuring it out, but what we've learned so far is fascinating and deeply strange. Deep-sea organisms have evolved molecular solutions to the problem of pressure, solutions that involve fundamentally different ways of building and maintaining their bodies. Their proteins, for instance, are structured differently than ours. Proteins are long chains of amino acids that fold into specific three-dimensional shapes, and those shapes determine what the proteins can do. Under high pressure, normal proteins would be squeezed, distorted, forced into configurations that don't work. But deep-sea proteins have evolved to be more flexible, more stable under compression. They're built with different amino acids, arranged in different sequences, creating structures that actually require high pressure to function properly. Some deep-sea fish proteins don't work correctly at surface pressure. They're adapted so specifically to the deep that bringing them to the surface breaks them. Their cell membranes are different too. Membranes are made of lipids, fatty molecules that form a barrier around cells. Under high pressure, lipids can become stiff, rigid, losing their flexibility. Deep-sea organisms compensate by using unsaturated lipids, molecules with more double bonds, which stay fluid even under pressure. It's a subtle chemical adjustment, but it makes the difference between life and death. Even their bones and skeletal structures are adapted. Many deep-sea fish have reduced skeletons, bones that are less dense, sometimes almost cartilaginous. They don't need the structural support that land animals or surface fish need because the water around them provides support. They're built light, flexible, designed to withstand compression rather than resist it. But here's what's truly remarkable. We don't fully understand how their cells handle pressure at the molecular level. We know they've adapted. We can see the differences in their proteins and membranes and structures. But the complete picture, exactly how every system in their bodies has been modified to function under such extreme conditions, is still being worked out. And it's not just about surviving pressure. It's about living full, complex lives under pressure. These fish hunt, they mate, they sense their environment, avoid predators, find food, navigate through three-dimensional darkness. They're not just clinging to existence. They're fully functional organisms with behaviors and strategies and evolutionary histories. Every time we bring a deep-sea creature to the surface for study, we're removing it from the only environment it can survive in. Many of them die from the pressure change before we can examine them. It's like trying to study a bird by bringing it to the bottom of the ocean. Of course it fails, but not because birds can't thrive in their own environment. They're just in the wrong place. So we're left trying to understand deep-sea biology through indirect means, analyzing tissue samples, studying proteins in the lab, using submersibles and remote cameras to observe behavior without disturbing the creatures. And what we're learning is that life has found solutions to problems we didn't think were solvable. It's evolved to inhabit spaces we assumed were uninhabitable. The deep-sea fish exist as living proof that the boundaries of life are wider than we imagined. That chemistry can be coaxed into working under conditions that seem impossible. That evolution, given enough time, can find answers to almost any challenge, can adapt to almost any environment, can turn the impossible into the ordinary. And there are likely still secrets we haven't uncovered, adaptations we haven't identified, molecular tricks we haven't learned. The deep sea keeps teaching us that life is more creative, more resilient, more surprising than our theories predict. And every discovery raises new questions, opens new mysteries, suggests that there's still so much we don't understand about how biology works at its limits. The impossible fish are swimming right now, deep beneath the weight of the ocean, living their impossible lives, proving that what we think can't be done is simply what we haven't figured out how to do yet. During the Cold War, Soviet submarines prowling the deep ocean began detecting something they couldn't explain. It was a sound, rhythmic, pulsing, almost biological in its pattern. The submariners called them quackers because of the way they sounded through the hull. A series of quick pulses, like the quacking of a duck, but lower, stranger, emanating from the darkness outside. And the sounds would follow them. A submarine would be running silent, trying to remain undetected, and the quacking would begin. It would pace the vessel, matching its speed, tracking its movements. Sometimes the sounds would circle the submarine. Sometimes they would fade away and then return hours later. The pattern was too consistent to be random, too purposeful to be mere noise. The Soviet Navy took this seriously. These were advanced nuclear submarines, designed to be invisible, inaudible, capable of hiding in the ocean's vastness, and yet something was tracking them, following them, producing sounds that suggested awareness, intention. The submariners reported the quackers with increasing frequency throughout the 1970s and 1980s. The sounds were logged, recorded, analyzed, but no one could figure out what was making them. The immediate fear, of course, was that it was American technology, some new sonar system, some underwater tracking device that could detect Soviet submarines and follow them. But that didn't quite fit. The sounds were biological in character, not mechanical. They had variations, modulations, a quality that seemed organic rather than electronic. So maybe they were whales or dolphins, some species with a call that happened to sound like it was tracking submarines. Marine biologists were consulted. Recordings were compared against known whale vocalizations, but nothing matched. The quackers didn't sound like any cataloged species. And then, in the early 1990s, the reports stopped. The Soviet Union collapsed. The submarines were decommissioned or repurposed, and the quackers vanished from the records. Or perhaps the submarines simply stopped hearing them. Or perhaps whatever was making the sounds moved to different waters, or changed its behavior, or simply stopped for reasons we can't fathom. Decades later, we still don't know what they were. Some researchers have speculated that the quackers might have been a type of whale or dolphin that we still haven't properly identified. Perhaps a population with an unusual vocalization pattern, or a species that's rare enough that we haven't encountered it since. Others have suggested it might have been a form of echolocation, marine mammals investigating the strange, large objects moving through their territory. There's also the possibility that the submarine's own equipment was somehow generating or distorting sounds, creating acoustic artifacts that seemed external but were actually byproducts of the vessel's operation. Though that doesn't explain why the sounds seemed to track the submarine's movements, or why they stopped when the submarine stopped. Or perhaps, and this is pure speculation, the kind of wondering that feels appropriate in the quiet darkness, perhaps the quackers were exactly what they seemed to be. Something in the ocean that noticed the submarines, that was curious about them, that followed them for reasons of its own, and then, when the submarines changed or disappeared, moved on to other concerns. The ocean is full of sounds we can't source. The hydrophone arrays that listen to the deep, pick up patterns and pulses and rhythms constantly, and many of them remain unidentified. We know some of them are geological, the creaking of the Earth's crust, the rumble of underwater landslides. We know some are biological, the songs of whales, the clicks of dolphins, the grunts and groans of fish, but there's a middle category, a gray area of sounds that might be either or neither, sounds that don't quite fit our categories. The quackers belong to that category. They were real. The recordings exist. The reports are consistent across multiple submarines and multiple years. But their source remains unknown. They've joined the library of ocean mysteries, acoustic ghosts that appeared, persisted for a while, and then faded back into the silence. There's something almost melancholic about that, the idea that something was out there, something aware enough to notice submarines, curious enough to follow them, vocal enough to announce its presence. And we never figured out what it was. We never got to see it, never got to understand it. It remains a voice without a body, a mystery without a solution. The ocean is full of such mysteries, events that happen once or rarely, phenomena that don't repeat on convenient schedules, creatures or processes that intersect with human awareness only briefly before disappearing again. We can't explain them all. We can't solve every puzzle. Sometimes all we can do is listen, record, preserve the evidence, and acknowledge that the ocean is stranger and more complex than our ability to comprehend it. The quackers are still out there somewhere, in the archives, in the memories of retired submariners who heard them. A reminder that during the Cold War, when nations were obsessed with secrecy and surveillance, and knowing everything about their enemies, the ocean kept its own secrets. It had mysteries that couldn't be solved by intelligence agencies or naval analysts, sounds that couldn't be explained away, presences that couldn't be identified. And maybe that's a good thing. Maybe it's healthy for us to encounter things we can't explain, to bump up against the limits of our knowledge, to be reminded that for all our technology and expertise, we're still strangers in the ocean, still visitors in a realm that doesn't belong to us and never will. The quackers were there before we knew to listen. They might still be there, making their sounds in waters we're not monitoring anymore. Or they might be gone, moved on, extinct, transformed into something else. We'll probably never know, and that's okay. Some mysteries are meant to remain mysteries. Some sounds are meant to go unexplained. And the ocean, vast and patient and full of secrets, continues its conversations in languages we haven't learned yet, speaking to things we can't see, in depths we can't reach. Deep underwater, there are formations that look like something from a dream, or a nightmare, depending on your perspective. They're called frozen waterfalls, though they're not frozen in the sense of ice. They're composed of methane hydrate, a strange compound where methane gas is trapped inside a lattice of frozen water molecules, creating a substance that looks like dirty ice. like frozen smoke, like something that shouldn't exist but does. These formations occur at methane seeps, places where the gas bubbles up from beneath the seafloor. Under the cold temperatures and high pressures of the deep ocean, the methane doesn't simply dissolve into the water. Instead, it combines with water molecules to form hydrate, which precipitates out and builds up over time, creating structures that can be dozens of feet tall, cascading down underwater slopes like waterfalls that have been paused mid-flow. They're ghostly, translucent. When you shine a light on them from a submersible, they glow with an eerie luminescence, and you can sometimes see bubbles of pure methane trapped inside, frozen in place, waiting. If you were to somehow bring a piece of methane hydrate to the surface, or even just to shallower, warmer water, it would begin to fizz and decompose, releasing the trapped gas, sublimating like dry ice, disappearing back into its component parts. But down in the cold depths, they're stable, permanent in a sense, though they're constantly growing, constantly accumulating new layers as more methane seeps up from below. These hydrate formations might hold clues to Earth's climate history. Methane is a powerful greenhouse gas, far more potent than carbon dioxide, though it breaks down more quickly in the atmosphere. Vast amounts of methane are locked up in hydrate deposits on the seafloor and beneath Arctic permafrost. Under current conditions, they're stable, frozen, harmless. But if the ocean warms, if temperatures rise even a few degrees, the hydrates could begin to destabilize, releasing their trapped methane into the water and eventually into the atmosphere. Some scientists think this might have happened before, during periods of rapid climate change in Earth's past. There's evidence that massive methane releases from destabilizing hydrates may have contributed to warming events, creating feedback loops where warming releases methane, which causes more warming, which releases more methane. It's one of the potential tipping points in climate science, one of the things that keeps researchers awake at night. But setting aside the implications for climate change, the hydrate formations are remarkable simply for what they are. Evidence of chemistry happening in ways we don't usually see. Methane and water, combining under pressure, creating a substance that's neither quite solid nor quite gas, that exists only in specific conditions, that looks like frozen waterfalls in the darkness of the deep sea. And like so much in the deep ocean, they might also be relevant to the question of life elsewhere in the solar system. Saturn's moon Titan has lakes of liquid methane on its surface. If there's an ocean beneath Titan's crust, and there might be, it could have methane seeps, hydrate formations, chemistry similar to what we see on Earth. Whether that chemistry could support life is an open question, but the existence of hydrate formations on Earth at least tells us that the basic building blocks are there, that methane and water can interact in complex ways under the right conditions. The frozen waterfalls are still standing, still growing slowly in the cold darkness. They've been there for thousands of years, accumulating molecule by molecule, building their strange structures grain by grain. They'll be there for thousands more unless the ocean warms, unless conditions change, unless the careful balance of temperature and pressure that keeps them stable shifts. They're beautiful in their alien way. Monuments to chemistry, to the strange things that happen at the boundaries of the possible. And they're a reminder that the ocean floor isn't just rock and sediment. It's an active landscape, a place where new substances form, where gases become solids, where the boundary between geology and chemistry blurs into something strange and wonderful. The deep ocean is full of structures we're only beginning to catalog: hydrate mounds, carbonate chimneys, iron-rich deposits. Each one tells a story about the chemistry of the planet, about the processes happening beneath the seafloor, about the way Earth creates and transforms materials over geological time. And each one suggests that there's still so much to discover, so many formations we haven't found yet, so many chemical processes happening in the darkness that we haven't documented. The frozen waterfalls of methane hydrate are just one example. One glimpse into the strangeness that exists beneath the waves, waiting to be noticed, waiting to be understood, waiting to teach us something new about the planet we call home. Its name suggests something from a horror story, vampire squid. And when you look at it, it seems to justify the name. Black or deep red skin, eyes that glow scarlet in the beam of a submersible's lights, 8 arms connected by a dark webbing that it can pull over itself like a cloak. When threatened, it turns itself inside out, exposing rows of fleshy spines, creating a display that looks genuinely nightmarish. But here's the twist. The vampire squid doesn't drink blood. It doesn't hunt. It isn't even really a squid, despite its name. It's the only surviving member of its own order, Vampiromorphida, something between a squid and an octopus, related to both but distinct from either, an evolutionary branch that split off hundreds of millions of years ago and has remained virtually unchanged ever since. And it's a gentle creature, a scavenger. It drifts through the oxygen minimum zone, a layer of the ocean between 2,000 and 3,000 feet deep, where oxygen levels are so low that most creatures can't survive. But the vampire squid has adapted to this hostile environment. Its metabolism is incredibly slow. Its blood carries oxygen more efficiently than almost any other animal's. It can survive on scraps, on the tiniest amounts of food, in a zone that most predators can't enter. What does it eat? Marine snow. That constant, gentle drift of organic particles falling from the sunlit waters above. Dead plankton, fecal matter, mucus, bits of disintegrating bodies, all slowly sinking through the water column. The vampire squid has evolved 2 specialized filaments, like long sensory tentacles, that it extends into the water. These filaments are covered in sticky mucus. When particles of marine snow touch them, they stick, and the squid slowly reels the filament back in, scrapes off the accumulated debris, and eats it. It's patient, slow. It doesn't chase anything. It simply waits for food to drift to it, and it subsists on what most creatures would consider waste. It's found a niche in one of the most inhospitable parts of the ocean and made it work through extreme specialization and patience. And those eyes, the largest eyes relative to body size of any animal in the world, they're not for hunting. They're for detecting the faintest traces of bioluminescence in the darkness. In the oxygen minimum zone, most light comes from other creatures, from the flashes and glows of jellies and fish passing by. The vampire squid's enormous eyes let it see those lights from far away. Let it know what's near. Let it avoid predators while conserving energy by moving as little as possible. The vampire squid is a living fossil, a creature that has found a way to survive virtually unchanged for hundreds of millions of years. It's seen the rise and fall of countless species, survived mass extinctions, persisted through dramatic changes in ocean chemistry and climate. And it's done so not through aggression or adaptability in the usual sense, but through extreme specialization, by becoming so perfectly suited to one specific, difficult environment that nothing else competes with it there. There's something poetic about that. The idea that survival doesn't always mean being fierce or fast or dominant. Sometimes survival means being small, patient, efficient. It means finding a niche that nobody else wants and making it home. It means doing one thing very, very well, even if that thing is eating marine snow in the oxygen-poor darkness. The vampire squid drifts through its lightless realm right now, as it has for eons, extending its filaments, collecting particles, surviving. It doesn't need our oceans to be clean or healthy in the way surface creatures do. It's adapted to scarcity, to low oxygen, to the minimum conditions that barely support life. In some ways, it's already living in a post-apocalyptic ocean, and it's doing fine. That's both impressive and slightly unsettling. It suggests that even if we damage the oceans severely, even if we create conditions that most creatures can't tolerate, something will survive, something will adapt, life will persist, even if it's a different kind of life, even if it's only the specialists, the extremophiles, the creatures that have already learned to thrive on scraps in the darkness. But the vampire squid also reminds us that evolution creates wonders we couldn't imagine. A creature that looks like it belongs in mythology but is real, living, drifting through the deep. A creature with the largest eyes in proportion to its body, perfectly adapted to see in near total darkness. A creature that has remained essentially unchanged for longer than mammals have existed, older than the Atlantic Ocean, persisting through time. Scales we can barely comprehend. It's not a monster. It's a survivor, a specialist, a piece of ancient history still living, still functioning, still doing what it's been doing since before the dinosaurs. And it's down there now, in the oxygen minimum zone, extending its sticky filaments, collecting the falling snow of the sea, quietly continuing its ancient routine in the patient darkness, waiting for nothing, hurrying nowhere, simply existing as it has always existed, as it will continue to exist long after we're gone. When scientists retrieved amphipods, tiny shrimp-like crustaceans, from the Mariana Trench, the deepest place on Earth, they expected to find adaptations to pressure, to darkness, to cold. What they didn't expect was aluminum. The amphipods' bodies contained significant deposits of aluminum in their tissues. Not trace amounts, substantial accumulations of this metal, incorporated into their exoskeletons and internal structures. And nobody knows why or how. Aluminum is the third most abundant element in Earth's crust, but it's not typically available to living organisms. In most environments, aluminum is locked up in minerals, bound in forms that don't dissolve easily, that don't enter biological systems. It's not an essential nutrient for any known organism. In fact, it's generally toxic. High concentrations of aluminum can interfere with cellular processes, damage tissues, disrupt enzyme functions. And yet these amphipods, living in the most extreme environment on the planet, at depths where the pressure is over 1,000 atmospheres, in complete darkness, in near-freezing water, are somehow taking in aluminum, accumulating it in their bodies, and apparently using it for something. the mystery has multiple layers. First, where is the aluminum coming from? Is it naturally present in the deep ocean at those depths in forms that can be absorbed? Is it leaching from sediments, from the breakdown of minerals on the seafloor? Or is it being delivered by some process we haven't identified? Hydrothermal vents, perhaps, or chemical reactions that only happen under extreme pressure. Second, how are the amphipods absorbing it? Most organisms have mechanisms to exclude or expel metals that aren't useful. Aluminum, being generally toxic, is usually something biology tries to keep out. But these amphipods are apparently taking it in deliberately, or at least not blocking its entry, which suggests they've evolved some mechanism to handle it. Third, and most intriguingly, what are they doing with it? Is it serving a structural purpose, reinforcing their exoskeletons against the crushing pressure? Is it part of some biochemical process we don't understand, a way of catalyzing reactions or storing energy? Or is it simply accumulating as a byproduct, something their bodies can't get rid of, building up over their lifetimes without causing harm because they've evolved tolerance? We don't have answers yet. The discovery is too recent, the samples too difficult to obtain. Studying deep-sea amphipods requires descending 7 miles to the bottom of the ocean, carefully collecting living specimens, and bringing them back to the surface, a process that usually kills them because of the pressure change. Dead specimens can tell us what's in their tissues, but not why it's there or what it's doing. But the aluminum amphipods are a reminder of how little we understand about biology at the extremes. We assume we know the basics, what elements life uses, what's essential and what's toxic, what's possible and what isn't. And then we find organisms that are breaking our rules, doing things we didn't think were possible, incorporating elements we assumed were irrelevant to biology. Life, it turns out, is more creative with chemistry than we expected. Given enough time, enough evolutionary pressure, enough generations to experiment with different solutions, biology can find uses for almost anything. It can take what's abundant and figure out how to work with it, even if that means developing entirely new metabolic pathways, new structural solutions, new ways of managing materials that would be poisonous to other organisms. The deep ocean seems to be especially good at producing these kinds of surprises. Perhaps because it's so isolated, so stable over geological time, evolution has had millions of years to optimize solutions that seem bizarre to us, but are perfectly functional in their specific environment. The aluminum amphipods have probably been accumulating aluminum for countless generations, refining whatever process allows them to do so, adapting to their local chemistry in ways that make sense down there, but seem impossible to us up here. And if the amphipods can incorporate aluminum, what else might deep-sea organisms be doing with unusual elements? Are there creatures using metals in ways we haven't discovered yet? Are there chemical processes happening in deep-sea biology that don't occur anywhere else, that rely on the specific conditions of extreme depth, the pressure, the cold, the chemistry of the water, the particular mix of elements available? Every time we sample the deep ocean, we find something unexpected. Some adaptation we didn't predict, some organism doing something we thought was impossible, some example of biology pushing past the boundaries we'd drawn around it. The aluminum amphipods are just the latest in a long line of discoveries that make us question our assumptions. that remind us how much we still don't know about how life works. They're still down there, still crawling across the seafloor in the Challenger Deep, still accumulating their mysterious aluminum deposits. They've been doing it for longer than humans have existed, longer than most species on Earth have existed. And they'll continue doing it, quietly, in the darkness, whether we understand them or not, whether we ever figure out their secrets or not. The ocean keeps teaching us that our theories are incomplete, our knowledge limited, our imagination insufficient to predict all the ways that life can solve the problem of existence. And perhaps that's the most important lesson of all. Not the specific facts we learn about amphipods or aluminum, but the broader understanding that nature is always more creative, more surprising, more full of possibility than we expect. On the deep ocean floor in certain locations, there are accumulations of bones that tell stories we're still learning to read. They're called whale falls, primarily, the term for what happens when a whale dies and its massive body sinks to the seafloor. A single whale carcass can sustain a complex ecosystem for decades. First come the scavengers, sleeper sharks, hagfish, crabs, stripping away the soft tissue. Then come the enrichment opportunists, worms, crustaceans, mollusks, feeding on the oils that seep from the bones. Finally come the sulfophilic bacteria, breaking down the lipids in the bones themselves, creating sulfide-rich environments that support chemosynthetic communities similar to those at hydrothermal vents. The process can take 50 years or more for a large whale. And during that time, the whale fall becomes an oasis of life in the deep sea, a concentrated source of nutrients in an environment where food is scarce and slow to arrive. But sometimes currents and topography conspire to create accumulations, places where multiple whale falls have occurred over time, creating fossil graveyards, bone fields where the skeletons of dozens or hundreds of whales have collected. These sites are incredibly valuable to science. They're archives of evolutionary history, collections of specimens from different time periods, windows into how whale populations have changed over millennia. And here's where it gets strange. In some of these graveyards, scientists have found bones from species that don't seem to match any living whales. Skeletal structures that suggest body plans we don't recognize, sizes that seem improbable, adaptations that don't fit our current understanding of whale evolution. This could mean several things. It could mean that there are whale species or lineages of large marine mammals that went extinct relatively recently, in the last few thousand or tens of thousands of years, and we simply haven't identified them yet from surface fossils. The deep ocean graveyards might preserve specimens we wouldn't find on land, animals that spent their entire lives at sea and never came near shores where their bones might wash up and be discovered. Or it could mean that some existing whale species have much more morphological variation than we realize. That there are populations or subspecies living in remote parts of the ocean, rarely seen, with body structures different enough from the cataloged specimens that we don't immediately recognize their bones. Or, and this is the possibility that's both exciting and unsettling, it could mean that there are still large animals in the ocean that we don't know about, not necessarily living in the deep sea themselves, but dying there, sinking there, leaving evidence of their existence in places we rarely visit. The ocean is vast. We've cataloged and studied the whales that come to the surface regularly, that migrate along coasts, that are easy to observe and photograph. But there could be populations that stay in deep water, that avoid shipping lanes, that live their entire lives in parts of the ocean we don't monitor. And we might only know about them through their bones, discovered by chance when a submersible happens to pass over the right patch of seafloor. This has happened before. The spade-toothed whale, one of the rarest mammals on Earth, was known only from a few skulls and skeletal fragments for decades. No one had ever seen a living specimen. It wasn't until 2010 that a complete body washed ashore in New Zealand, and scientists realized what it was: an entire species of whale living somewhere in the deep ocean, rare enough or remote enough that we'd essentially never encountered it alive. If that can happen with whales, large air-breathing mammals that have to come to the surface, what else might be out there? What other lineages, what other large marine animals might exist in low enough numbers or remote enough locations that we simply haven't found them yet? The fossil graveyards suggest that our catalog of ocean life is incomplete. They hint at extinctions we didn't witness, species we didn't know existed, populations that lived and died without human awareness. And that's both humbling and fascinating. The idea that megafauna, animals weighing tons, can exist on the same planet as billions of humans and remain essentially unknown. It also raises questions about what we've lost without knowing it. If there are bones in the deep ocean from species we can't identify, species that might now be extinct, then we've lost animals we never knew we had. Lineages that disappeared before we could study them. Ecosystems that functioned in ways we'll never understand. Behaviors and migrations and life histories that have been erased. The deep ocean graveyards are still there, still accumulating bones, still preserving evidence. Most of them we haven't found yet. Most of the ocean floor remains unmapped in detail, unexplored, unexamined. Every year, deep-sea expeditions discover new whale falls, new accumulations, new puzzles waiting to be solved. And each one is a reminder that the ocean keeps its records in places we can't easily access. That history is written in bones scattered across the abyssal plains, and that we're only beginning to learn how to read those records, how to interpret what they're telling us about the life that came before, the life that exists now, and the life that might have disappeared without us ever knowing it was there. The deep ocean floor is covered in a constant, gentle snowfall. Marine snow, it's called. Tiny particles of organic matter drifting down from the sunlit waters above. A slow rain of death and waste that becomes the primary food source for the deep sea. Dead plankton, fecal pellets, mucus, fragments of larger organisms, all of it sinking, taking days or weeks to fall through miles of water, accumulating on the seafloor as sediment. It's a steady process, predictable. Scientists have measured it, modeled it, incorporated it into their understanding of how carbon cycles through the ocean, how nutrients move from surface to depth. But occasionally, without warning, the snowfall becomes a blizzard. Suddenly, over the course of hours or days, an enormous pulse of organic material descends from above. The seafloor can be buried under inches of fresh detritus, enough to transform the local ecosystem almost overnight. Organisms that normally have to search for scattered particles of food suddenly find themselves surrounded by abundance. Populations of bacteria explode, scavengers congregate. The entire character of the community changes, and then just as suddenly it ends. The blizzard stops. The normal gentle snowfall resumes, and the seafloor slowly returns to its baseline state. The accumulated material gradually processed, consumed, broken down. We don't know what causes these marine blizzards. That's the mystery. There are theories, of course, hypotheses about what might trigger such massive, sudden pulses of organic material. One possibility is that they're related to surface blooms, phytoplankton, the microscopic plants that form the base of the ocean food web, sometimes reproduce explosively under the right conditions, creating dense blooms that can turn the water green or brown, visible from satellites. When these blooms die, all that organic matter sinks. Perhaps marine blizzards are the deep-sea echo of surface blooms, the result of millions of dead phytoplankton cells descending together. But that doesn't explain all of them. Some marine blizzards occur without any obvious surface bloom preceding them. Some happen in locations or at times that don't match the patterns of surface productivity. Another theory involves gelatinous organisms, jellyfish, salps, larvaceans. These creatures produce mucus structures called houses that they use to filter food from the water. When the houses get clogged, the organisms abandon them and the structures sink, often with food particles still trapped inside. A mass spawning event or a population boom of salps could potentially create a synchronized sinking of millions of these mucus houses, delivering a sudden pulse of organic material to the deep. But again, we don't always see evidence of surface jellies before a marine blizzard occurs, and the timing doesn't always match. There's also the possibility that we're simply not seeing the triggers because they're happening in the open ocean, far from observation, or at depths we don't regularly monitor. The ocean is huge, and our sensors and research vessels can only be in a tiny fraction of it at any given time. Something could be happening hundreds of miles away or at mid-depths, and we'd only see the result when it reached the seafloor. What makes marine blizzards particularly intriguing is what they suggest about the variability of the deep sea. For a long time, scientists thought of the deep ocean as essentially unchanging, a stable, constant environment where conditions varied little over time. But marine blizzards show that's not entirely true. The deep sea can experience pulses, events, disruptions that dramatically alter local conditions, even if only temporarily. And the organisms living down there have to be adapted to that variability. They have to be able to survive long periods of scarcity, subsisting on the normal, gentle snowfall. But they also have to be able to take advantage of sudden abundance when it arrives, to process large amounts of food quickly, to reproduce or grow or store energy while conditions are favorable. That suggests a different kind of adaptation than we usually think about. Not just tolerance for extreme conditions, but flexibility in the face of unpredictable variation. The ability to wait patiently through lean times and respond quickly when opportunity arrives. Marine blizzards might also have implications for how we understand carbon cycling in the ocean. Carbon dioxide absorbed by phytoplankton at the surface eventually sinks as those organisms die. Much of it is consumed or decomposed on the way down, releasing the carbon back into the water. But some reaches the deep sea floor and is buried in sediments, effectively removed from the carbon cycle for millions of years. Marine blizzards, by delivering large pulses of organic carbon to the deep, might be a significant mechanism for carbon sequestration, a way that the ocean pulls carbon out of the atmosphere and locks it away. But we can't model that process accurately if we don't understand what triggers the blizzards, how often they occur, how much material they deliver. The deep ocean might be capturing far more carbon than our models predict, or far less, depending on factors we haven't identified yet. So the marine blizzards remain mysterious, observable, measurable, but not yet fully explained. They're another reminder that the deep ocean is more dynamic, more variable, more responsive to surface processes than we initially thought. The snowfall isn't always gentle. Sometimes it becomes a storm, and the deep sea transforms briefly into something different, something abundant, something that challenges our assumptions about what the bottom of the ocean is like. And they're still happening, these blizzards. Right now, somewhere in the deep ocean, organic matter might be raining down in quantities that bury the seafloor, that feed entire communities, that store carbon in sediments where it will remain for geological ages. We just don't know where or when or why. The ocean keeps its weather patterns even in the depths where there is no wind, no clouds, only the slow or sudden fall of particles through the darkness. In the twilight zone of the ocean, that layer between 650 and 3,000 feet, where the last traces of sunlight fade into complete darkness, there are fish that have evolved solutions to vision that seem almost impossible. One of the strangest is the barrel-eye fish, known scientifically as Macropinna microstoma. For decades, scientists knew this fish existed. They'd caught specimens in nets, preserved them, studied their anatomy. But something seemed wrong with the specimens. Their eyes appeared damaged, their heads oddly structured, as if something had been lost in the preservation process. Then, in 2004, researchers from the Monterey Bay Aquarium Research Institute managed to observe a living barrelay in its natural habitat, using a remotely operated vehicle with cameras. And they discovered something astonishing. The fish's head is transparent, not just translucent, truly transparent like glass. You can see right through the dome of its skull to the structures inside. And what's inside are two tubular eyes, bright green because of the pigment they use to filter light, pointing straight upward. The barrel eye spends most of its time floating motionless in the water column, looking up. Those tubular eyes are incredibly sensitive to light, designed to detect the faintest silhouettes of prey. Small fish, jellyfish, backlit against the dim glow from the surface far above. It's an ambush predator, waiting for something to pass overhead, using its extraordinary upward vision to spot opportunities. But here's what's remarkable. The eyes can rotate. Inside that transparent dome, the fish can pivot its tubular eyes forward, changing from looking up to looking ahead. When it spots prey above, it rotates its eyes, reorients its body, and swims forward to capture it. Then, presumably, it returns to its resting position, eyes aimed upward again, waiting. This is a solution to vision that no one predicted. The transparent head serves as a protective shield. Those delicate tubular eyes are vulnerable, and the dome keeps them safe from the stinging tentacles of jellyfish, which are common in the twilight zone, and which the barrel eye apparently steals food from. The ability to rotate the eyes gives the fish flexibility. It can hunt in the vertical dimension, but also orient forward when needed. It's an example of evolution solving a problem in a way that seems needlessly complex to us, but is clearly effective. Why not just have eyes that can look in multiple directions? Why the elaborate transparent dome, the rotating tubes, the specific green pigment? The answer is probably that this particular solution emerged from the specific evolutionary history of this fish, the specific pressures it faced, the specific mutations that happened to occur and prove advantageous. Evolution doesn't design from scratch. It modifies what's already there, and sometimes that leads to solutions that are baroque, elaborate, seemingly over-engineered, but perfectly functional. And the barrel eye is hardly alone in having bizarre visual adaptations. The twilight zone is full of fish with strange eyes on stalks, eyes that look in different directions simultaneously, eyes that are enormous relative to body size, eyes that have evolved to detect specific wavelengths of bioluminescence. Vision in the deep ocean operates under completely different constraints than vision on land or in the sunlit surface waters. There's no broad-spectrum ambient light. There's only the faintest glow from above, growing dimmer with depth, and the scattered bioluminescent flashes from other creatures. So eyes have to be either incredibly sensitive, capable of detecting single photons, or they have to be tuned to specific wavelengths, optimized to see the particular colors that their prey or predators produce. The geometry of vision changes too. On land or in clear, shallow water, you can see in all directions more or less equally. But in the twilight zone, threats and opportunities are often vertical, things coming from above or below. So many fish have evolved eyes that look upward or downward, or that split the difference, with one eye looking up and one looking down. The barrel eye's rotating eyes are an elegant solution to this problem. They give the fish the ability to hunt in the vertical dimension while retaining the ability to see forward when necessary. And the transparent head is just beautiful in its strangeness. It's the kind of adaptation that seems like science fiction, like something a creative writer might invent, except it's real, it exists, it swims in the ocean right now. We didn't know about the transparent head for a long time because we'd never seen a living specimen in its natural environment. The nets that caught barrel eye fish damaged the delicate dome, or the pressure change as they were brought to the surface destroyed it. It wasn't until we could observe them with remote cameras, undisturbed in their habitat, that we understood how they actually looked, how they actually functioned. And that raises the question, what other adaptations are we missing because we can't observe organisms in their natural environment? How many deep-sea creatures have features that seem broken or incomplete in preserved specimens, but are actually elegant and functional when seen alive? The ocean is full of solutions we haven't witnessed yet. Adaptations that only make sense in context, in the specific conditions where the organism lives. The barrel eye fish is a reminder that biology is more inventive than we are, that evolution produces designs we couldn't imagine, that the deep ocean is full of creatures whose very anatomy challenges our assumptions about what's possible. They're up there right now, or down there, depending on your perspective. Floating in the twilight zone, they're transparent, heads catching the faint light, their green tubular eyes scanning the water above for prey, rotating when needed, solving the problem of vision in the dim waters with a solution that took millions of years to refine and that we're only now beginning to appreciate. Deep on the ocean floor, in a few rare locations, there are pools of liquid carbon dioxide. Not carbon dioxide gas dissolved in water, actual liquid CO2, sitting in depressions in the seafloor, distinct from the ocean water above it, with a clear boundary between the two phases. You could, if you had the right equipment and could survive the depth, see the surface of these lakes, watch them ripple with underwater currents, observe the strange properties of a substance that exists as a liquid only under specific conditions of pressure and temperature. At the surface, at normal atmospheric pressure, carbon dioxide is a gas. The air we exhale, the bubbles in soda, one of the greenhouse gases in our atmosphere. Cool it down to about 78 degrees Fahrenheit at normal pressure, and it becomes dry ice, sublimating directly from solid to gas without passing through a liquid phase. But compress it enough, subject it to enough pressure, and it can exist as a liquid. On the ocean floor at depths below about 10,000 feet, where the pressure exceeds 500 atmospheres, liquid CO2 is stable. If there's a source of carbon dioxide, perhaps from volcanic activity, or from the breakdown of organic matter in the sediments, it can seep up and pool in depressions, creating these strange underwater lakes. They're rare. We've only found a handful of them. But they're significant for several reasons. First, they're windows into chemistry that doesn't happen on land, or at least not naturally. Liquid CO2 has properties that are different from both the gas and the solid form. It's denser than water, which is why it pools instead of rising. It can dissolve certain substances that water can't. It creates local chemical conditions that are unique, hostile to most life, but potentially habitable for specialized organisms. Second, they might preserve ancient seawater. Carbon dioxide pools can trap pockets of water beneath them, sealing them off from the rest of the ocean. These trapped pockets might contain water that's thousands of years old, unaffected by surface processes, preserving a record of what the ocean was like in the past. Scientists can analyze these samples to learn about past climate, past ocean chemistry, past temperatures, information that's valuable for understanding how the ocean has changed over time and how it might change in the future. Third, they're potentially relevant to understanding climate change. Carbon dioxide in the atmosphere is warming the planet, but the ocean absorbs a significant fraction of that CO2. As atmospheric levels rise, the ocean absorbs more. Some of that carbon dioxide reacts with seawater to form carbonic acid, lowering the pH and creating ocean acidification. But some of it might, under the right conditions, form liquid pools on the deep sea floor, effectively sequestering it away from the atmosphere for long periods. Whether this is happening on a scale that matters for climate is unclear. The liquid CO2 lakes we found are small, isolated. They're not soaking up meaningful amounts of atmospheric carbon, but they demonstrate that the process is possible, that carbon dioxide can be stored in the deep ocean in liquid form, and that raises questions about whether we could deliberately enhance this process. Whether we could capture CO2 from power plants or the atmosphere and inject it into the deep ocean, where it might form stable liquid pools and remain sequestered for centuries or millennia. There are risks, of course. Liquid CO2 is acidic. It would lower the pH of the surrounding seawater, potentially harming deep-sea ecosystems. It could leak back into the water column over time, negating the sequestration benefit. And if we made a mistake, injected it at the wrong depth, or in too large a quantity, we could cause ecological damage we don't fully understand. But the existence of natural liquid CO2 lakes tells us that the ocean has mechanisms for handling and storing carbon that we're only beginning to understand, and it suggests that the deep ocean might play a larger role in the global carbon cycle than we've accounted for. The lakes themselves are eerie. Imagine descending in a submersible to the deep sea floor, your lights cutting through the darkness, and suddenly you come upon a pool, a distinct surface, mirror smooth or rippling gently, reflecting your lights. But it's not water reflecting back at you. It's liquid carbon dioxide, a substance that shouldn't exist as a liquid under most conditions, sitting there quietly, bordered by sediment, preserving secrets. Some of the pools have been sampled. Scientists have lowered instruments, taken measurements, collected liquid for analysis. The work is delicate, difficult. The pools are small. The equipment has to function at extreme depth. And disturbing the pool too much could mix the CO2 with the surrounding water and ruin the sample. But what they've learned is that these lakes are isolated systems, little worlds unto themselves, with their own chemistry, their own microbiology. Yes, there are bacteria that can survive in and around liquid CO2, and their own history, their time capsules and chemical laboratories and ecological experiments all at once, and they're probably more common than we realize. We've found only a few because we've explored so little of the deep sea floor in detail. There might be hundreds or thousands of liquid CO2 pools scattered across the abyssal plains, most of them undiscovered, most of them sitting quietly in the darkness, preserving their samples of ancient water, hosting their communities of extremophile bacteria, participating in the carbon cycle in ways we haven't measured yet. The ocean is full of these surprises, phenomena that exist only under specific conditions, that challenge our understanding of chemistry and physics, that remind us how much diversity there is in the ways matter can behave. Liquid CO2 lakes are just one example. One more instance of the deep ocean doing something we didn't expect, creating something we didn't predict, showing us that reality is always stranger and richer than our theories suggest. We often talk about exploring the ocean as if it's a single project, a unified effort. But the truth is more fragmented, more incomplete. We've explored small fractions of the deep ocean in detail. Specific sites, particular features, locations chosen for their scientific interest or economic value. But the vast majority of the ocean floor remains unmapped at high resolution. We have a general sense of the topography. Satellites can measure the height of the sea surface, and because water piles up slightly over underwater mountains and dips slightly over trenches, due to gravitational effects, we can infer the large-scale features of the seafloor from space. This gives us a rough map, good enough to identify major mountain ranges, trenches, plateaus. But the resolution is poor. Those satellite-derived maps can't see features smaller than a mile or two across. They can tell you there's a mountain, but not its exact shape, not its smaller peaks and valleys, not the details that matter for understanding its geology or ecology. To get high-resolution maps, you need sonar. You need ships or underwater vehicles that actually travel over the seafloor, bouncing sound waves off it and measuring the time it takes for the echoes to return. This is time-consuming and expensive. A research vessel might be able to map a few hundred square miles per day. The ocean covers 139 million square miles. So far, we've mapped about 20% of the ocean floor at high resolution. The other 80% remains essentially unknown in detail. We know it's there, we know the general outlines, but we don't know the specifics. And what that means is that there are entire mountain ranges beneath the ocean that are taller than the Rockies, longer than the Alps, and we don't know their names. We've never seen them in detail. We don't know what lives on them, what geological processes shape them, what minerals they contain, what role they play in ocean circulation. The mid-ocean ridges, the vast underwater mountain ranges where tectonic plates spread apart and new oceanic crust is formed, stretch for 40,000 miles around the planet. They're the longest mountain range on Earth, dwarfing anything on land, and most of them have never been explored at the scale of individual peaks and valleys. There are seamounts, underwater mountains that rise from the seafloor but don't reach the surface, scattered across the ocean by the tens of thousands. Each one is a potential hotspot of biodiversity, a stepping stone for species dispersal, a unique geological feature. We've studied fewer than 1% of them in any detail. Submarine canyons cut through the continental slopes, some of them larger and deeper than the Grand Canyon. They funnel sediment from the continents into the deep ocean, create unique habitats, channel currents in ways that affect regional oceanography. Most have been mapped only roughly, their finer features unknown. This isn't just an academic curiosity. The unmapped portions of the ocean floor likely contain resources we don't know about. Minerals, hydrothermal vents, biological communities, perhaps even energy sources. They also contain hazards, underwater landslides, volcanic features, areas of unstable sediment that could affect submarine cables or offshore infrastructure. And they almost certainly contain species we've never documented. Seamounts, in particular, often host endemic species, organisms that live on that one mountain and nowhere else, isolated by distance and depth from other populations. If we don't know the seamounts are there, we can't study their inhabitants, can't protect them, can't even catalog them before they potentially go extinct. There's also something philosophically significant about the unmapped ocean floor. We live on a planet where most of the solid surface is unknown to us in detail. We've made incredible maps of Mars, of the Moon, of asteroids millions of miles away. But right here, beneath our oceans, there are landscapes we've never seen, mountains we've never named, valleys we've never descended into. It's humbling. It suggests that for all our technology, for all our scientific progress, we're still, in some fundamental way, strangers on our own planet. We know the parts we can easily access, the land, the surface of the sea, the atmosphere. But the parts that require real effort to reach, that demand specialized equipment and significant resources, those parts remain mysterious. There are initiatives to change this. The Seabed 2030 project aims to map the entire ocean floor at high resolution by 2030. It's an ambitious goal requiring international cooperation, significant funding, and years of ship time. Whether it will be achieved on schedule is uncertain, But the fact that we need such a project at all is telling. The mountains are still there, rising from the abyssal plains, hosting their communities of life, shaping currents, accumulating sediments, doing whatever underwater mountains do. They were there before we knew to look for them. They'll be there long after we're gone, and most of them remain nameless, unseen, unknown, silent giants in the dark, waiting patiently for someone to notice them, to map them, to understand what role they play in the vast, interconnected system that is the ocean floor. In recent years, something unusual started happening along the Pacific coast of North America. Divers, fishermen, beachcombers, all began reporting massive numbers of strange, translucent creatures washing ashore or floating in the water. They looked like ridged cucumbers, or perhaps like the pickles you'd find in a jar, glowing with a soft blue-green bioluminescence when disturbed. They're called pyrosomes, colonial tunicates, meaning they're not individual animals, but colonies of thousands of tiny zooids living together in a gelatinous tube. Each zooid is a filter feeder, pulling in water and straining out phytoplankton. Together they form structures that can range from a few inches to several feet long, hollow tubes with one open end drifting through the ocean like living sock puppets made of light. Pyrosomes aren't new. They've always existed in the ocean, but what was new was their sudden, dramatic increase in numbers. In 2014, and again in 2017-2018, they appeared in unprecedented quantities, billions of them. So many that they clogged fishing nets, made some areas nearly impossible to fish, washed up on beaches in piles, and altered the local ecosystem in ways scientists are still trying to understand. The blooms were so intense that they showed up in scientific monitoring equipment, in fish stomach samples, in seabird diets. Creatures that normally never encountered pyrosomes suddenly found them everywhere. Some adapted quickly. Certain fish species started eating them, despite their low nutritional value. Seabirds tried eating them too, though pyrosomes are mostly water and don't provide much energy. But why did this happen? What triggered such massive blooms of organisms that had previously been relatively uncommon in those waters? The answer seems to be related to ocean warming, though the exact mechanisms are still being investigated. Pyrosomes typically live in warmer, more tropical waters, but as ocean temperatures rise, the range of many species is shifting poleward, moving north in the northern hemisphere, south in the southern hemisphere, tracking the water temperatures they're adapted to. The Pacific coast experienced unusually warm water during those years, partly due to a phenomenon called the blob, a large mass of abnormally warm water that persisted in the northeastern Pacific. The warm water created conditions that pyrosomes thrive in, and their populations exploded. But even that doesn't fully explain the scale of the blooms. Why so many? Why so suddenly? Pyrosomes reproduce quickly when conditions are favorable. Each zooid in the colony can bud off new zooids, allowing the colony to grow exponentially. And when millions of colonies are all reproducing simultaneously, the numbers can become staggering in a matter of weeks. There's also speculation that changes in ocean chemistry, nutrient availability, or the abundance of their phytoplankton food sources might have contributed. Climate change affects the ocean in complex, interconnected ways. Warming temperatures don't just move species around, they alter currents, change stratification patterns, affect when and where nutrients upwell from the deep, modify the timing of plankton blooms. All of these factors can cascade through the ecosystem, sometimes producing results that seem disproportionate to the initial change. The pyrosome blooms eventually subsided. As water temperatures returned closer to normal, the populations decreased. But they left scientists with questions. Will this happen again? Are these blooms going to become a regular occurrence as the ocean continues to warm? And what are the long-term effects on the ecosystem? Pyrosomes, being mostly water and low in nutritional value, aren't a good food source. If they're taking up space and resources that would otherwise go to more nutritious organisms, like krill for instance, then their blooms could be problematic for predators that depend on those other prey species. Whales, seabirds, and fish might find the ocean full of food that doesn't actually sustain them. There's also the question of what pyrosomes do to the ecosystem while they're alive. As filter feeders, they remove phytoplankton from the water, potentially competing with other filter feeders. When they die, they sink, carrying carbon and nutrients to the deep sea, but in a form that might not be easily accessible to deep-sea organisms. The pyrosome blooms are a reminder that ocean warming doesn't just mean gradually shifting temperatures. It means disruptions, invasions, population explosions of species that can take advantage of new conditions. It means ecosystems being altered in ways that are difficult to predict and sometimes difficult to manage. And it's a reminder of how little we know about baseline conditions in the ocean. We don't have long-term historical data on pyrosome populations. We don't know if blooms like this happened in the past. Maybe they did, in years before we were paying attention, before we had the monitoring systems to detect them. Or maybe they're genuinely new, a consequence of ocean conditions that haven't existed before in human history. What we do know is that the ocean is changing. Species are moving. Populations are blooming in unexpected ways. And some of those changes involve creatures we barely understand, appearing in numbers we've never seen, creating situations we don't have precedents for. The sea pickles glowed in their millions, pulsed their gentle bioluminescence through the water, drifted with the currents, and then faded again. But they left a mark, a data point in our understanding of how ecosystems respond to change, a warning that ocean warming produces surprises, a reminder that the marine world is more dynamic and less predictable than we often assume. They're still out there, somewhere in the Pacific, in numbers that are probably closer to normal now, but they're waiting. And if conditions become favorable again, if the water warms, if the nutrients align, if the currents shift in the right way, they could bloom again, suddenly and spectacularly, lighting up the ocean with their soft blue-green glow, transforming the water into a living constellation of drifting, glowing tubes, beautiful and strange and completely unexpected. In the deep ocean, beyond where sunlight reaches, beyond where photosynthesis is possible, there are coral reefs. This seems impossible at first. Corals, we learn, are animals that have a symbiotic relationship with algae. The algae photosynthesize, providing the coral with energy, and in return, the coral provides the algae with a protected environment and access to nutrients. Shallow water coral reefs, the vibrant, colorful ecosystems we associate with tropical coasts, depend entirely on this partnership. No light means no photosynthesis means no reef, but deep-sea corals have found a different solution. They don't have symbiotic algae. They're carnivorous, feeding on plankton and organic particles that drift down from above. They extend their polyps into the current and capture what they can, slowly accumulating energy, slowly building their calcium carbonate skeletons, slowly constructing reefs in the eternal darkness. And they grow extraordinarily slowly. Some deep-sea coral species add only millimeters to their structure per decade. A coral colony that's a few feet tall might be thousands of years old. Some of the largest deep-sea coral structures we found have been growing continuously for more than 4,000 years, meaning they started forming around the time humans were building the pyramids in Egypt. And they've been there ever since, accumulating layer upon layer, recording the conditions of the deep ocean year after year after year. This makes them archives, climate records. Each layer of coral skeleton is laid down under specific chemical conditions, and those conditions are reflected in the composition of the skeleton itself. The ratio of different oxygen isotopes, for instance, reflects the temperature of the water. The amount of certain trace elements reflects the chemistry of the seawater at the time. By carefully sampling deep-sea corals, drilling out tiny cores, analyzing them layer by layer, scientists can reconstruct ocean conditions going back millennia. They can track how temperatures changed, how currents shifted, how the chemistry of the deep ocean responded to climate variations on the surface. It's like reading tree rings, but for the ocean, and covering timescales that tree rings can't match. This is incredibly valuable for understanding climate change. We have direct measurements of ocean temperature and chemistry going back only about a century, the period when we've had ships with accurate instruments systematically sampling the ocean. Before that, we have to rely on indirect evidence, ice cores, sediment cores, historical records. But those methods have limitations. They tell us about the atmosphere or about conditions at the sea surface, but not about the deep ocean. Deep-sea corals fill that gap. They tell us what the deep ocean was like before industrialization, during the medieval warm period, during the Little Ice Age, during all those climate variations that occurred naturally before human influence became significant. And that baseline is essential for understanding what's happening now, for distinguishing natural variation from human-caused change. But here's the problem. Deep-sea coral reefs are fragile and slow-growing. Damage them, and they won't recover in any time frame that matters to humans. Break a coral that's been growing for 2,000 years, and you've destroyed 2,000 years of growth, 2,000 years of climate records, 2,000 years of accumulated structure, and we're damaging them. Bottom trawling, a fishing method that drags heavy nets across the seafloor, destroys deep-sea corals wherever it encounters them. The nets tear through the reefs, breaking apart structures that took millennia to build. In some areas, deep-sea coral reefs that had been growing for thousands of years have been obliterated in minutes. We're also losing them to ocean warming and acidification. As the ocean absorbs more carbon dioxide from the atmosphere, it becomes more acidic, making it harder for corals to build their calcium carbonate skeletons. Warmer water can also stress corals, affecting their ability to grow and reproduce. Deep-sea corals are adapted to very stable conditions, cold temperatures, consistent chemistry. They're not equipped to handle rapid changes. So we're in a race, in a sense. We're trying to study these ancient corals to extract the climate records they contain, before we lose them. Some scientists are mapping deep-sea coral reefs, identifying locations that should be protected. Some are collecting samples, carefully extracting cores, analyzing the data as quickly as possible. Some are advocating for fishing regulations that would prohibit bottom trawling in areas where deep-sea corals are known to exist. But most of the deep ocean remains unmapped. Most deep-sea coral reefs haven't been discovered yet. They're out there, somewhere in the darkness, thousands of feet down, growing slowly, recording climate history, hosting communities of fish and invertebrates that depend on them for habitat. And they're vulnerable to damage from activities we're undertaking right now. Activities that might destroy them before we even know they exist. The ancient corals are patient. They've been patient for millennia. They don't need us to appreciate them, don't need us to study them. They've been doing their slow, quiet work of building reefs and recording ocean conditions for thousands of years without human awareness. But they can't survive trawling nets. They can't adapt quickly to changing chemistry. And once they're gone, along with the irreplaceable records they contain, the climate history they've preserved, the ecosystems they support. So we're learning to see them, to value them, to protect them. But slowly, perhaps too slowly. The deep ocean is vast, and our resources are limited, and the corals are scattered across thousands of square miles of seafloor that we haven't mapped yet. It's a race between discovery and destruction, between learning what's there and losing it before we understand what we had. And the corals just keep growing, millimeter by millimeter, year after year, in the cold darkness, recording everything, patient and ancient and impossibly fragile, holding secrets about the ocean's past that we desperately need for understanding its future. In 2016, scientists announced a discovery that was both fascinating and deeply unsettling. They had found a Greenland shark that was approximately 400 years old. 400 years. Born around 1620, during the reign of King James I, when the Mayflower was sailing to America, when Shakespeare had been dead only a few years. This shark had been swimming through the cold, dark waters of the North Atlantic for centuries, outliving empires, wars, technological revolutions, living through the entire span of the modern world. The Greenland shark is a massive creature. They can grow to over 20 feet long and weigh more than a ton. They live in the deep, cold waters of the Arctic and North Atlantic, usually at depths between 600 and 7,000 feet, moving slowly through the darkness, hunting fish, scavenging carrion, living lives that remain largely mysterious to us because they're so difficult to observe in their natural habitat. We've known for a while that they were long-lived, but determining the exact age of a shark is difficult. Unlike bony fish, which have ear bones called otoliths that form annual growth rings like tree rings, sharks have skeletons made of cartilage, which doesn't preserve clear age markers. Scientists had to develop new methods, analyzing the proteins in the shark's eye lenses, which accumulate in layers over time and can be dated using radiocarbon techniques. When they applied these methods to Greenland sharks caught as bycatch in fishing operations, they found that even relatively small individuals were often over a century old, and the largest specimens, the ones that were 15 to 20 feet long, were potentially 300 to 500 years old, with 400 being the best estimate for the oldest individual they examined. This makes the Greenland shark not just long-lived, but the longest-lived vertebrate known to science, longer-lived than bowhead whales, which can reach 200 years, longer-lived than giant tortoises, which can reach 150 years, longer-lived than any mammal, bird, or reptile we've documented. But here's where it gets even stranger. We have never observed their mating behavior. We don't know where they mate, or how, or when. We've never seen them give birth. Greenland sharks are ovoviviparous, meaning they give birth to live young, but no one has ever witnessed it. We don't know how long their gestation period is, how many pups they have, how often they reproduce. Based on the age data, scientists estimate that Greenland sharks don't reach sexual maturity until they're about 150 years old, a century and a half of growing and developing before they can reproduce. And if they live for 400 years, that potentially means they have a reproductive lifespan of 250 years, 2.5 centuries during which they could be producing offspring. But all of this is speculation, extrapolation from limited data. The Greenland shark's life cycle is almost entirely unknown. These ancient creatures move through the deep ocean, living impossibly long lives, and we're only just beginning to understand the timescales they operate on. There are implications for conservation. If Greenland sharks don't reproduce until they're 150 years old, then any fishing pressure that kills young sharks is potentially devastating to the population. It takes a century and a half to replace a single breeding adult. If we fish them faster than they can reproduce, which is very easy to do, given how slowly they mature, we could drive them toward extinction without even realizing it until it's too late. There are also implications for biology. How does an animal live for 400 years? What mechanisms prevent aging? What protections do they have against cancer, against accumulated cellular damage, against all the things that limit lifespan in shorter-lived creatures? Greenland sharks live in cold water, which slows their metabolism. They grow slowly, about 1 centimeter per year. Their entire biology operates on a different time scale than most animals. Perhaps that extreme slowness is part of the secret. Maybe aging is partially a function of metabolic rate, and by living slowly, Greenland sharks age slowly too. But we don't know for certain. We can't study them easily. They live in remote, difficult-to-access locations. They're deep divers, often beyond the reach of normal research equipment. They're not charismatic like whales or dolphins. They don't breach or sing or interact with humans. They're silent, slow-moving, living their centuries-long lives in the cold darkness, largely unnoticed. And yet they're extraordinary. The idea that there are sharks swimming in the Arctic right now that were alive during the American Revolution, that remember, if sharks remember, a world before electricity, before industrial civilization, before climate change. They're living links to the past, biological time capsules, creatures whose lifespans encompass most of modern human history. But we don't know how many there are. We don't know if their populations are stable or declining. We catch them occasionally as bycatch, but we don't target them specifically, so we don't have good data on their abundance. They might be common or they might be rare, slowly declining as the ocean changes around them. The 400-year-old sharks are still out there, cruising through the deep, cold waters, growing imperceptibly, aging on time scales we can barely comprehend. They were there before we knew to look for them. They'll probably be there after we're gone, assuming we don't fish them to extinction first, assuming the ocean doesn't change so much that even these ancient, patient creatures can't adapt. They're a reminder that there are lifespans and timescales in the ocean that dwarf our own, that there are creatures living lives that span centuries, witnessing changes we can only read about in history books, carrying memories, if that's the right word, of an ocean that was colder, cleaner, fuller of life than the one we know today. Beneath the ocean's surface, scattered across the abyssal plains and rising from the seafloor, there are seamounts, underwater mountains that don't quite reach the surface. They're volcanic in origin, typically formed by hot spots in the Earth's mantle that punch through the oceanic crust, building mountains over millions of years as tectonic plates slowly drift across them. Scientists estimate there are somewhere between 30,000 and 100,000 seamounts in the world's oceans. The uncertainty in that estimate, the fact that we can only say somewhere between, with a range that spans 70,000 potential mountains, tells you everything you need to know about how little we've explored the deep ocean floor. Of those tens of thousands of seamounts, we've studied fewer than 1,000 in any detail, less than 1%. The rest are known only from satellite-derived maps, if they're known at all, vague bumps in the gravitational data, indicators that something is down there, but not much more than that. And this matters, because seamounts are biodiversity hotspots. Each one creates unique conditions that attract and sustain life. As currents hit the seamount and flow up its slopes, they bring nutrients from the deep water up toward shallower depths, creating localized upwelling. This enrichment supports dense communities of filter feeders, corals, sponges, crinoids, which in turn attract fish, which attract larger predators. Seamounts also act as navigational waypoints for migratory species. Some fish and marine mammals use them as landmarks, stopping points on long journeys across otherwise featureless ocean. Certain species congregate at seamounts to mate, to feed, to rest. But perhaps most significantly, seamounts often host endemic species, organisms that live on that particular seamount and nowhere else. Because seamounts are isolated from each other, separated by miles of deep ocean, populations that colonize them can evolve independently, developing unique characteristics, becoming distinct species over time. This means that each seamount is potentially a biological island, a pocket of unique biodiversity. And it also means that if we damage a seamount through fishing, mining, or other disturbances, we might drive species to extinction without ever having known they existed. Bottom trawling is particularly destructive to seamount ecosystems. The heavy nets scrape across the seafloor, destroying coral and sponge communities that might have taken centuries to establish. Some seamounts that were once densely covered with life are now barren, stripped clean by repeated trawling. There's also growing interest in deep-sea mining, particularly on seamounts that are rich in minerals like cobalt, nickel, and rare earth elements. These metals are valuable for electronics, batteries, renewable energy technologies, but mining them would involve removing sections of the seamount itself, fundamentally altering the structure and destroying whatever ecosystems exist there. The problem is that we're making decisions about how to use seamounts before we've finished discovering what's on them. We're deciding whether to fish them, mine them, protect them, often without knowing what species live there, what ecological roles they play, what scientific or economic value they might hold. Some seamounts might be relatively similar to each other, hosting broadly overlapping communities, but some might be unique, supporting species found nowhere else on Earth. And we won't know which is which until we actually explore them. There are initiatives to survey more seamounts, to catalog their biodiversity, to understand their ecological significance. But with tens of thousands of seamounts and limited research funding, it's slow work. Each seamount requires a dedicated expedition, ship time, submersibles or remotely operated vehicles, expert scientists, weeks or months of work to properly survey even a single mountain. Meanwhile, the seamounts remain mostly unknown. Tens of thousands of underwater mountains, each one a potential refuge for unique life, each one a geological feature that influences ocean currents and chemistry, each one a piece of the puzzle that is the deep ocean ecosystem. Some of them have names, the ones near shipping lanes, or that have been studied, or that pose navigational hazards, but most don't. They're just coordinates, if that. Locations in databases that indicate there's probably a mountain here, but without confirmation, without details, without any real knowledge of what they're like. It's strange to think about, isn't it? Tens of thousands of mountains on our planet that don't have names, that have never been climbed, if you can call descending to them climbing, that have never been photographed in detail, that exist in a state of almost perfect anonymity, known only as statistical probabilities in oceanographic models. And yet they're not abstract. They're real places with real geography, real ecosystems, real histories. Volcanic eruptions built them millions of years ago. Currents have shaped them. Life has colonized them. And they stand there now in the darkness, hosting whatever communities have found their way to them, creating whatever localized conditions their presence generates. Perhaps someday we'll map them all, name them all, understand what makes each one unique. Perhaps future generations will look back on our time and wonder how we could have been so ignorant of our own planet's geography, how we could have left so many mountains unexplored. Or perhaps not. Perhaps the seamounts will remain mostly unknown, their biodiversity undocumented, their stories untold. Perhaps we'll damage or destroy some of them before we ever learn what they contained. Perhaps the ocean will keep these secrets, and future scientists will study what we lost and wish they could have seen it before it was gone. The mountains are patient. They've been there for millions of years. They'll be there for millions more, unless geological processes recycle them back into the mantle. And whether we discover them or not, whether we name them or not, whether we protect them or exploit them, they'll continue doing what they do, rising from the seafloor, creating habitat, supporting life, participating in the vast, interconnected system that is the ocean, indifferent to our awareness, indifferent to our choices, simply existing in their tens of thousands, silent and invisible beneath the waves. In the polar oceans, where sea ice forms at the surface, there's a phenomenon so strange, so deadly, that when it was first filmed in 2011, it seemed almost supernatural. They're called brinicles, brine icicles, and they form under specific, precise conditions that occur in the cold waters beneath sea ice. When seawater freezes, it doesn't incorporate the salt into the ice structure. Instead, the salt is expelled, creating pockets of extremely cold, extremely salty brine. This brine is denser than the surrounding seawater, so it sinks. But as it sinks, in the right conditions, it continues to freeze the water around it. The brine is so cold, so concentrated with salt, that it creates a tube of ice extending downward from the sea ice above. A growing icicle reaching down toward the seafloor, sometimes at speeds visible to the eye, growing several inches per hour. And when a brinacle touches the seafloor, it spreads. The supercooled brine flows across the bottom, freezing everything it touches. Starfish, sea urchins, anything slow-moving enough that it can't escape. The brinacle freezes them in place. The footage captured by BBC's Frozen Planet showed a brinacle reaching the seafloor and spreading out like creeping death, leaving a trail of ice-encased organisms in its wake. It's dramatic, almost malevolent in appearance. The brinacle looks like a skeletal finger reaching down from above, and its effects are genuinely deadly to the creatures it touches. But it's purely a physical phenomenon, driven by the unusual properties of salt water, temperature, and ice formation. Brinicles require very specific conditions. The water has to be cold enough, below the freezing point of seawater, which is lower than the freezing point of fresh water because of the salt content. The sea ice above has to be relatively still, so that the brine can accumulate and sink in a concentrated stream rather than dispersing. The surrounding water has to be calm enough that the brinacle doesn't break apart as it forms. These conditions occur primarily in Antarctic waters, though they've also been observed in the Arctic. But even in polar regions, brinicles are relatively rare. Most of the time, one or more of the necessary conditions isn't met, and brinicles don't form, or they form but quickly break apart or melt. The fact that we didn't film one until 2011 tells you how difficult they are to observe. You need to be diving beneath sea ice in polar waters, which is dangerous and requires specialized equipment and training. You need to be in the right place at the right time when a brinacle happens to be forming. And you need lighting and camera equipment that can capture it, which is challenging in dark, cold water. But now that we know to look for them, now that we have the technology to film them, we're learning more about how they work, how often they occur, what factors influence their formation. Brinicles might also be relevant to understanding ice formation on other worlds. Saturn's moon Enceladus has a subsurface ocean beneath an icy crust, and geysers of water occasionally erupt from cracks in that crust. As that water contacts the cold vacuum of space, it freezes. Could brinacle-like structures form in Enceladus's ocean? Could similar processes occur on Europa or on other icy moons where liquid water exists beneath frozen surfaces? On Earth, brinicles are mostly just a curiosity, a beautiful, strange phenomenon that reminds us how alien the polar oceans can be, how many physical processes are at work that we don't normally see or think about. They're not a major ecological force. They don't significantly affect the overall ecosystem. They're just one of many ways that ice, salt, and cold water interact to create structures and patterns that seem almost magical. But they're also a reminder of how much happens beneath sea ice that we don't witness. The polar oceans, especially under ice cover, are incredibly difficult to study. We can't easily access them. We can't observe them continuously. We catch glimpses, brief expeditions, limited observations, occasional footage of something remarkable. How many other phenomena occur under the ice that we haven't documented yet? How many other physical processes, biological behaviors, ecological interactions happen in those cold, dark waters, unseen by human eyes? The brinicles are growing right now, somewhere in the Antarctic, reaching down through the frigid water, creating their trails of ice, freezing whatever they touch. They've been doing it for as long as there has been sea ice, long before we existed to witness it, long before we had cameras to capture it. And they'll continue doing it, indifferent to our awareness, a small, strange part of the endless creativity of physical processes in the ocean, beautiful and deadly and utterly natural. Fingers of ice reaching through the darkness, touching the seafloor, leaving their frozen mark and then melting away. Temporary sculptures in the cold water, here and then gone, like so much in the ocean, ephemeral, mysterious, and barely seen. For decades, submarines operating in Antarctic waters detected a strange sound, a rhythmic pattern of low-frequency pulses, repeated over and over, sometimes for hours. It sounded almost mechanical, like something electronic, but with an organic quality that suggested it might be biological. The submariners called it bioduck because of its distinctive pattern, quack, 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 a steady rhythm echoing through the deep water. The sound was first recorded in the 1960s. Over the following decades, it was detected regularly, particularly in the Southern Ocean around Antarctica, always in winter, always in deep water, always with that same distinctive pattern. Researchers cataloged it, analyzed its frequency and structure, tried to match it against known biological sounds. Nothing matched. It wasn't like any whale song. It wasn't like seal vocalizations. It didn't resemble fish sounds, or the calls of penguins or other seabirds. It was something else, something unidentified, coming from somewhere in the cold Antarctic waters. And for 50 years, nobody could figure out what was making it. The bioduck became one of those enduring mysteries mentioned in papers about unidentified ocean sounds, discussed in documentaries about the deep sea, filed away under unknown biological source in acoustic databases. And then in 2013, researchers finally solved it. They attached acoustic tags to Antarctic minke whales, small baleen whales that live in Antarctic waters year-round, and recorded the sounds the whales made as they dove to feed. And there it was, the bioduck. The whales were producing it, probably as some form of communication or echolocation while hunting in the dark Antarctic winter. It had taken 50 years to identify the source of a sound that was detected regularly, that occurred in predictable patterns, that wasn't particularly rare or unusual once you knew to listen for it. 50 years to connect the sound to the animal making it. And the reason it took so long was simple. Antarctic minke whales are difficult to study. They live in remote waters, often under sea ice, in conditions that make observation extremely challenging. They're not large by whale standards, maybe 25 to 30 feet long, and they're not particularly conspicuous. They don't breach spectacularly. They don't come close to ships. They just swim through the cold water, hunting krill, making their bioduck calls, living their lives in the Antarctic wilderness. The fact that we couldn't identify the source of such a common sound for so long is humbling. It shows how little we actually observe in the ocean, how many sounds and behaviors and patterns are happening constantly, all around. And we're only catching fragments of it. The ocean is noisy. It's full of biological sounds. Whale songs, dolphin clicks, fish grunts, shrimp snaps, plus all the geological sounds of ice moving and plates shifting and sediments sliding. The cacophony is constant, overlapping, complex, and most of it we don't understand. We don't know what's making many of the sounds, don't know what they mean, don't know what information they're carrying. The bioduck mystery was solved eventually, but there are other sounds, the bloop, Julia, the quackers, and countless others that remain unexplained. Some might be geological, some might be biological, some might be from species we know about but haven't associated with those particular sounds. And some might be from species we haven't properly studied yet, or from behaviors we haven't witnessed. Acoustic monitoring of the ocean is relatively cheap and non-invasive. You can deploy hydrophones, let them record for months, and analyze the data later. It's one of the best ways to study marine life without disturbing it. But interpreting that data, figuring out what all the sounds mean, where they're coming from, what's making them, is incredibly difficult. The bioduck calls are still happening. Antarctic minke whales are still swimming through the Southern Ocean, still producing their rhythmic patterns, still hunting in the winter darkness. We know what they are now. We've solved that particular mystery. But the fact that it was a mystery for so long, that something so common could remain unidentified for decades, should give us pause. What else are we hearing but not understanding? What other voices are speaking in the ocean, producing sounds we detect but can't interpret? The whales have been making their calls for as long as there have been whales. The ocean has been full of biological acoustics for millions of years, and we've only recently, in the last century, really, developed the technology to listen, to record, to begin trying to understand what we're hearing. We're like someone who's just learned that people are talking, but can't yet understand the language. We know communication is happening. We can hear it. We can record it. But we don't always know what's being said, or who's saying it, or why. The ocean continues its conversations in languages we're still learning, in voices we're still identifying, in patterns we're still trying to decode. And perhaps that's appropriate. Perhaps it's good that the ocean keeps some of its communications private, that not everything translates easily to human understanding, that there are exchanges happening in the deep water that belong to the creatures making them, not to us. The bioduck was a mystery, and then it wasn't. But in solving that one mystery, we were reminded of how many mysteries remain, how much we still don't know, how vast and complex and full of voices the ocean is, speaking constantly in the darkness, whether we're listening or not. Scattered across the deep ocean floor, in certain regions far from land, there are fields of strange, rounded rocks. They're called manganese nodules, and they look almost artificial, perfectly spherical or potato-shaped lumps of metal-rich minerals sitting on or partially buried in the soft sediment of the abyssal plains. They range in size from marbles to grapefruits, occasionally larger, and they're remarkably uniform in their composition. They're made primarily of manganese and iron oxides, but they also contain valuable metals, nickel, copper, cobalt, rare earth elements, bound up in their dark, layered structure. And they grow, slowly, extraordinarily slowly. These nodules accumulate metal from seawater and from the sediments around them, building up layer upon layer, like pearls, but made of metal instead of nacre. The growth rate is measured in millimeters per million years. A nodule the size of a potato might have been growing for 10 million years or more. This makes them among the slowest growing geological formations on Earth. They're forming right now, accumulating metal atom by atom, but at rates so slow that they might as well be frozen in time from any human perspective. We don't fully understand how they form. The process seems to involve both chemical precipitation, metals dissolved in seawater crystallizing onto the surface of the nodule, and biological activity. Bacteria appear to play a role, possibly concentrating metals or creating conditions that promote precipitation. But the exact mechanisms, the reasons why they form in some locations and not others, the factors that determine their size and composition, all of this is still being investigated. What's particularly mysterious is their uniform shape. Why are they so round? Why don't they grow in irregular lumps? The nodules apparently roll slightly, very slowly, turned by bottom currents or by the activities of organisms on the seafloor, and this rolling keeps them from becoming permanently buried and allows metal to accumulate evenly on all sides. But the currents that could roll something as heavy as a rock are gentle, barely perceptible. The nodules must move only occasionally, perhaps once every few years or decades, just enough to stay exposed and maintain their shape. Manganese nodules have been known since the late 19th century, when the HMS Challenger expedition dredged some up during its pioneering survey of the deep ocean. But they remained mostly a curiosity, interesting to geologists, but not particularly important, until people started thinking about mining them. The metals in manganese nodules are valuable. Cobalt and nickel are used in batteries. Rare earth elements are essential for electronics, wind turbines, electric vehicles. As demand for these metals increases, and as land-based sources become more expensive or difficult to access, deep-sea mining has started to look economically attractive. Mining companies have proposed using remotely operated vehicles to vacuum up nodules from the seafloor, bringing them to the surface for processing. It would be, in effect, strip mining the deep ocean, removing a resource that took millions of years to form, processing it for its metal content, and discarding the rest. The problem is that we don't know what role manganese nodules play in the deep sea ecosystem. They're not just rocks, they're substrates. Organisms attach to them, live on them, use them as habitat in an environment where hard surfaces are rare. The abyssal plains are mostly soft sediment, mud and ooze, and the nodules are some of the only solid objects available. Sponges anchor to them, corals grow on them, fish hide among them. Removing the nodules means removing that habitat, potentially affecting species we haven't even cataloged yet. The abyssal plains are among the least explored environments on Earth. We've surveyed only tiny fractions of them. We don't know what lives there in most places, don't know how ecosystems function, don't know what species depend on nodules for survival. There's also the question of the sediment plumes that mining would create. Vacuuming up nodules means disturbing sediment, creating clouds of particles that would spread with bottom currents, potentially covering surrounding areas, smothering organisms, altering conditions over large areas. The effects could extend for miles beyond the actual mining site. Some scientists argue that deep-sea mining should be prohibited, or at least heavily regulated, until we understand more about deep-sea ecosystems and can accurately assess the impacts. Others argue that if we're going to transition to renewable energy and electric vehicles, we need these metals, and deep-sea mining might have less environmental impact than some land-based mining operations. It's a difficult question, made more difficult by our ignorance. We're being asked to make decisions about resource extraction in environments we barely understand, weighing economic benefits against ecological costs we can't accurately calculate because we don't have enough data. Meanwhile, the nodules continue their impossibly slow growth, accumulating metal, rolling occasionally in the gentle currents, hosting whatever organisms find them, participating in the chemical cycles of the deep ocean in ways we're still working out. They've been there for millions of years. They represent a resource that formed over geological timescales, an accumulation of metals that can't be replaced on any human timescale. Once mined, they're gone. The habitat they provided is destroyed. The organisms that depended on them have to find alternatives, if alternatives exist. It's strange to think about mining rocks that are older than most species currently alive on Earth. Rocks that started forming during the Miocene epoch, when early apes were evolving in Africa, when the world was warmer and the continents were in slightly different positions. They've been sitting on the seafloor through ice ages and warm periods, through mass extinctions and evolutionary radiations, through the entire rise of human civilization, slowly accumulating their layers, waiting. And now we're considering scooping them up, millions of them, processing them for their metal content, and moving on to the next field, the next patch of seafloor, leaving behind bare sediment where the nodules used to be, disrupting ecosystems we've barely studied, changing the deep ocean in ways we can't fully predict. The nodules don't care, of course. They're not alive. They have no investment in their own continued existence, but the organisms that live on them might care if they could. And future scientists might care, wishing they could have studied those ecosystems before they were altered, wishing they could have understood what was lost. The potato rocks of the abyss, ancient, slow-growing, mysterious, sitting in the darkness, waiting to be either understood or exploited, or perhaps both, while we decide what we value more, the metals they contain or the mysteries they represent. Life, as we understand it, has certain requirements. It needs water, energy, carbon, and a handful of other elements: nitrogen, phosphorus, sulfur, trace amounts of various metals. And there are certain things that are toxic, that interfere with the chemistry of life, that biology generally tries to avoid. Arsenic is one of those things. It's poisonous to most organisms because it mimics phosphorus. It's chemically similar enough that it can slip into biological molecules where phosphorus should be, but different enough that it doesn't work properly, disrupting enzymes, damaging DNA, interfering with metabolism. So when scientists discovered bacteria in the deep ocean that not only tolerate arsenic, but actually use it as an energy source, it was surprising. More than surprising, it was paradigm shifting. These bacteria were living in environments rich in arsenic, places where most life would be poisoned, and they were thriving, metabolizing the arsenic, incorporating it into their biochemistry in ways that seemed impossible. The bacteria use arsenic in place of oxygen in certain metabolic processes, essentially breathing arsenic, using it as an electron acceptor in the chemical reactions that generate energy. This isn't the same as the briefly controversial claim from 2010 about bacteria incorporating arsenic into their DNA. That turned out to be incorrect, but the metabolic use of arsenic is real, well documented, and genuinely strange. It suggests that the chemistry of life is more flexible than we thought. We tend to think of biology as being built on a specific set of elements and processes, the ones we see in familiar organisms, the ones that work in Earth's surface environments. But extremophile bacteria keep showing us that biology can adapt to use different elements, different chemical pathways, different solutions to the problem of extracting energy from the environment. Arsenic metabolizing bacteria have been found around hydrothermal vents, in deep-sea sediments, in environments where arsenic is naturally abundant. They're part of communities of extremophiles that have evolved to thrive in conditions that would kill most organisms. High temperatures, high pressures, toxic chemical concentrations, absence of oxygen, absence of light. And each one of these extremophiles is a proof of concept. They demonstrate that life can work under conditions we once thought were impossible. They expand the boundaries of where we might find life, what it might look like, what chemistry it might use. This has obvious implications for astrobiology. If life on Earth can use arsenic, can thrive in boiling acidic water, can survive in the cold darkness of the deep sea using chemistry we didn't expect, then life elsewhere in the universe might be far more diverse than we've imagined. We've been looking for life on other worlds by looking for Earth-like conditions: liquid water, moderate temperatures, oxygen, carbon dioxide, sunlight. And those are good starting points, because that's where familiar life thrives. But extremophiles suggest that we should broaden our search parameters, that life might exist in places we've dismissed as too hostile, using chemistry we haven't considered. Mars might have arsenic-rich environments where arsenic metabolizing bacteria could survive. Europa's ocean, heated by tidal forces, might have chemical gradients that support life using elements we don't normally associate with biology. Titan's hydrocarbon lakes might host life based on completely different solvents and chemical pathways. Or maybe not. Maybe Earth is unique, and the extremophiles here are just making use of unusual niches on a fundamentally life-friendly planet. But the point is that we can't rule out these possibilities anymore. Life has shown itself to be more creative, more adaptable, more willing to experiment with different solutions than we expected. The arsenic-eating bacteria in the deep ocean are part of that larger story. They're another example of biology pushing past the boundaries we'd drawn around it. Another instance of life finding a way to exist in conditions that seem prohibitive. Another reminder that our theories about what's necessary for life are based on limited experience and might need to be revised. These bacteria don't care that they're expanding our understanding of biochemistry. They're just living, metabolizing, reproducing, doing what they've evolved to do in their specific environment. They've probably been there for millions of years, using arsenic, thriving in toxicity, completely indifferent to our surprise. But their existence matters. It matters for how we think about life's limits. It matters for where we look for life beyond Earth. It matters for understanding the full range of what biology can do, what chemistry can support, what counts as a habitable environment. The deep ocean is full of these lessons. Every extremophile we discover teaches us something about the flexibility of life, about the possibilities we hadn't considered, about the ways that evolution can find solutions to problems we thought were insurmountable. And there are almost certainly more out there, more species using unusual chemistry, more examples of life doing things we haven't imagined yet. The deep ocean is vast, sparsely sampled, full of environments we've barely begun to study. Every expedition brings back new species, new metabolic pathways, new examples of biological creativity. The arsenic eaters are just one example, one group of bacteria living in one type of environment using one unusual element. But they represent something larger, the idea that life is more inventive than we are, that it explores possibilities we don't think to look for, that it finds ways to exist in the harshest conditions, using whatever resources are available, adapting to whatever challenges it faces. And that's both humbling and inspiring. Humbling because it shows how limited our imagination is, how much we still have to learn about biology and chemistry and the nature of life itself. Inspiring because it suggests that life might be more common in the universe than we think, that the conditions necessary for life might be broader and more varied than we've assumed, that we might not be as alone as we sometimes fear. The bacteria are still there, still eating arsenic, still thriving in the toxic depths, still doing their impossible chemistry in the darkness, teaching us lessons we're only beginning to understand. The deep ocean, below about 3,000 feet, is cold. Consistently, predictably cold. Temperatures hover between 2 and 4 degrees Celsius, just above freezing, across most of the deep ocean floor. This consistency is one of the defining features of the deep sea. It's stable, constant, unchanging over seasons and years, except when it isn't. In certain locations, scientists have detected temperature anomalies, patches of water that are warmer than they should be, sometimes significantly warmer, with no obvious source of heat. These aren't near hydrothermal vents, which are well-known sources of hot water. These aren't in areas where we'd expect volcanic activity or tectonic processes to be generating heat. They're just warm spots, unexplained, anomalous. The temperature differences aren't enormous. We're talking about water that's maybe 5 or 10 degrees warmer than the surrounding deep water, not boiling hot springs. But in an environment as stable as the deep ocean, even a few degrees is significant. It represents an input of heat that shouldn't be there, an energy source we haven't identified. Some possibilities have been proposed. Perhaps there are low-temperature hydrothermal vents that we haven't discovered yet. Vents that don't produce the dramatic black smoke or plumes, but that still release warm water into the deep ocean. Perhaps there are pockets of heat in the oceanic crust, radioactive decay or residual heat from Earth's formation, that occasionally seep through in places we haven't mapped. Perhaps the anomalies are related to deep ocean currents in ways we don't understand. Currents bringing warmer water from distant locations, creating localized mixing that produces temperature variations. Perhaps they're temporary phenomena, warm spots that appear and then dissipate, related to specific oceanographic conditions that we haven't identified yet. Or perhaps And this is speculation, the kind of wondering that belongs to late-night contemplation. Perhaps they're indicators of processes happening deep in the oceanic crust or mantle that we simply don't understand yet. Heat sources we haven't recognized, geological activities that operate on long time scales and produce subtle effects that are difficult to detect. The deep ocean is thermally stable because it's isolated from the surface. Heat from the sun doesn't penetrate to those depths. The water down there is cold because it originated in polar regions, where cold, dense water sinks and spreads across the seafloor, eventually filling the deep ocean basins. This process, thermohaline circulation, is well understood, predictable, reliable. But if there are warm anomalies that don't fit that pattern, that suggest heat inputs we haven't accounted for, then our understanding of deep ocean circulation and heat distribution might be incomplete. We might be missing sources of heat or mechanisms of heat transfer that affect ocean chemistry, biology, and circulation in ways we haven't measured. This matters for climate modeling. The ocean is a major part of Earth's climate system. It stores heat, transports it around the planet, releases it to the atmosphere in specific patterns. If there are heat sources in the deep ocean that we haven't included in our models, if Earth's interior is contributing more heat to the ocean than we thought, then our predictions about ocean temperatures, circulation patterns, and climate responses might need adjustment. It also matters for understanding deep-sea ecosystems. Temperature affects everything in the ocean: metabolic rates, species distributions, chemical reactions, water density, and circulation. If there are warm spots that create localized conditions different from the surrounding water, they might support different communities, different species, different ecological interactions. But studying these anomalies is difficult. They're in the deep ocean, thousands of feet down, requiring specialized equipment to access. They're often small, localized, easy to miss unless you happen to pass through them with the right sensors. And they might be variable, appearing and disappearing over time, making them hard to characterize with limited sampling. So they remain mysterious, noted in scientific papers, marked on maps where they've been detected, but not fully explained. Another example of the deep ocean holding secrets, presenting puzzles, reminding us that even the most fundamental characteristics, like temperature, can sometimes surprise us. The warm anomalies are still there, probably, unless they've dissipated. Patches of slightly warmer water in the cold, deep sea, heated by something, somewhere, for reasons we haven't pinned down. They're affecting the local chemistry, possibly hosting different microbial communities, contributing to heat budgets we haven't fully calculated. And they're waiting for better sensors, better mapping, better understanding of deep ocean processes, waiting for someone to figure out where the heat is coming from, why it's there, what it means. Waiting patiently in the darkness, anomalous and inexplicable, like so much in the deep ocean, real but not understood, observed but not explained, one more mystery in the vast collection of mysteries that is the ocean floor. Perhaps we'll solve this one eventually. Perhaps we'll discover new types of geological heat sources, or previously unknown circulation patterns, or thermal processes we hadn't considered. Perhaps the warm anomalies will turn out to have a simple explanation that we just hadn't thought of yet. Or perhaps they'll remain mysterious, one more reminder that even in an age of satellites and sensors and supercomputers, the ocean can still surprise us, still present phenomena we can't quite explain, still hold secrets in its depths that resist our attempts to understand them. The deep ocean is cold, except where it isn't, and those exceptions, those anomalies, those warm spots in the cold darkness, they're telling us something, trying to teach us something about how the ocean works, about processes we haven't recognized, about the complexity that underlies even the most basic measurements. We just have to learn how to listen, how to interpret, how to understand what the ocean is saying through its anomalies, its mysteries, its endless capacity to surprise us with new questions, new puzzles, new reminders of how much we still have to learn about the planet we call home. And that's 30 mysteries, 30 questions the deep ocean holds, 30 examples of how little we truly know about the world beneath the waves. Perhaps what's most striking about these mysteries isn't that they exist, but that they persist. We live in an age of remarkable technology. We can sequence genomes, detect gravitational waves, observe galaxies at the edge of the universe, and yet we can't reliably find giant squid. We can't explain sounds we've been hearing for decades. We can't fully map the floor of our own ocean. There's something humbling about that, something that puts our knowledge in perspective. For all our advances, for all our capabilities, the ocean remains largely unknown, not because it's impossibly far away, but because it's right here, covering most of our planet, and we simply haven't looked closely enough yet. But maybe that's okay. Maybe it's healthy to live on a planet that still holds secrets, that still surprises us, that still has room for mystery and wonder. Maybe the unknown is as important as the known, the questions as valuable as the answers. The deep sea is still down there, still cold and dark and vast, still full of creatures we've never seen, sounds we can't explain, processes we don't understand. It's been there for hundreds of millions of years, long before we existed, to wonder about it. And it will be there long after we're gone, patient and mysterious and fundamentally indifferent to our curiosity. But while we're here, while we have the technology and the motivation and the capacity to wonder, we'll keep looking, keep exploring, keep trying to understand what lives in the darkness, what makes those sounds, what creates those patterns, what explains those anomalies. Not because we need to know, not because the mysteries pose any immediate threat or promise any immediate benefit, but because they're there, because we're curious, because learning what we don't know is one of the things that makes us human. Sleep well, dream of the depths if you dream at all, and know that somewhere in the cold darkness, miles beneath the surface, the ocean is continuing its ancient work, creating, destroying, sustaining, mysterious, patient, eternal, asking questions we haven't learned to answer yet, holding secrets we haven't learned to discover, simply being what it's always been, vast, deep, and beautifully, endlessly unknown. Good night.